January meeting of the Concord Zoning Board of Adjustment. We will follow our usual procedure this evening, which is to say we will take up the cases in the order in which they appear on the agenda. I will ask the appellants to step forward and be seated and sworn in, and be seated in the chairs to my right and offer whatever testimony they would like us to hear. We request that the appellants keep their testimony to a 10-minute interval, if at all possible. We will then ask the appellants to step down, and we will solicit testimony from anyone in the audience who wishes to be heard in favor of the appeal, and also anyone who wishes to be heard in opposition to the appeal. We ask that those people confine their testimony to a 5-minute interval. Following that, I will check in with code enforcement to see if there are any comments from the code enforcement office that apply to the case. And if any issues have been raised that seem to bear factual clarification, the appellant will have the opportunity to offer that clarification, not new arguments, prior to our closing the public testimony portion of the hearing. Under most circumstances, the board will consider and act on each case prior to moving on to the next one. We do have, in order to be legal, we do have a administrative matter to take care of, which is item number 1. Who wants my job?
I think you should continue to have your job.
Thank you so much. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? You thought I was going to vote, didn't you?
I wasn't sure which way you were going to go.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your confidence, or at least your tolerance. The first case this evening is case 0135, 2023, 315 South Main Street, UT, Urban Transitional District. Jonathan and Jacqueline Ruggles, Revocable Trust, are the owners. The applicant seeks a variance to Article 2869A, signs permitted in non-residential districts, to allow replacement of an existing sign with a new sign of 33.25 square feet versus 12 square feet that is allowed.
I could just give you a quick primer on this one.
Sure.
This is another hearing in addition to one we had for the same application last meeting. Staff had erred and done the wrong section of the ordinance, so we're kind of cleaning that up. So if it looks similar, that's why.
Very good. Thank you.
Can we just incorporate last month's hearing into this month and just take a vote?
I don't see why not.
I'm not sure we ought to do that,
That's fine.
since it was a procedural goof up. I think we probably ought to go through the whole thing. I don't anticipate that it'll burden us, although you'll be pleased to know that Nick had the same idea. I swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
Yes.
And may we have your name for the record, please?
Josh Messenger.
Is there anything different from what we learned last month?
No, everything is the same.
You want to touch on the high points? The record?
Yeah, the sign has been existing for 30 or 40 years. And since then, the ordinance has been rewritten, and when we went to replace the sign, it was brought to our attention that we needed a variance because of the new ordinance. We're replacing a like-for-like sign with the same square footage, and that's the reason for the variance, is the overage of the square footage of approximately 20 square feet.
Questions from the board?
But is there anything, refresh our memory, what's specific about, putting aside the fact that it had already been existing, what is specific about the lot or the piece of property that justifies having the larger sign?
The existing frame is, the framework is, accommodates that size sign, and that's what the owners wanted, and it was something that they thought was granted or like grandfathered in, that because the sign there has been there. So.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Is there anyone who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who would like to be heard in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
No.
With that, I'll declare the public testimony portion of the hearing closed. We've heard testimony that this is essentially the same appeal that we heard last month, and we have taken up the case in order to correct an error in the notification. Nick, how do you think? Looks good?
Looks good. I'll move approval.
Okay. Anyone like to make any comments before we call for a second? Is there a second?
I will second it and incorporate the comments I made last month.
Very good. Any other comments?
I was just looking for the minutes to refresh my memory, but I think I'm inclined to approve for the same reasons that I wish the applicant had given us a little more. I think the uniqueness of the property has to do with the kind of the heavy traffic in that area and the visibility that I think having a sign only as small as the ordinance provides would be too small for catching the attention of the drivers just for directional purposes. And I think it's consistent with the other signs in that area.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll call for a vote. Everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted again. That brings us to case 0122, 2023, 89 North State Street, CVP, Civic Performance District. Now, I think did we not table this one before? Yes, we did.
I have a recusal. I'm going to step down on this one.
Right, we have 2 recusals on this one, I think, yeah. But we also have 2 alternates, so we can hear it with a full board, which we could not do last week. And I'm going to turn off this little squatter so that it'll stop bothering me. Do I hear a motion to reopen the case?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. We have taken the case back up at the table or reopened it, or whatever the correct term is. The applicant is seeking a variance to Articles 28.71A and 28.72, 28.77A, 28.77C, 28.77E, 28.77F, 28.77G, 2, 28.77I, 28.77J, 28.78C, 28.79A through B, 28.710A and C, 28.710D and E to permit the following. The applicant seeks variances from access, circulation, and parking provisions of Article 28.7, bet you'd figured that out already, to maintain an existing non-conforming parking lot as it is, while changing from the use that is allowed by right to another use that is also allowed by right, and that would require 3 additional parking spaces. Do we have anyone from 89 North State Street? Yes, sir. 2. Good evening. I had neglected to mention earlier that there is a sign-up sheet there. If you would jot your names on that, as well as to announce them, that would be very helpful to us, and also prevent us from misspelling them. Appreciate it. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
Swear to tell the truth, nothing but.
Would you identify yourselves as you testify, please?
Sure. My name is Garrett Thorsman. I'm an attorney with Pierce Atwood LLP, and I'm counsel to Concord CTC LLC.
My name is Adrienne Sass, and I'm the Regional Director for Acadia Healthcare. I oversee all of the CTCs in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine.
What would you like us to know?
We had a presentation. I don't know if you want to go through it.
No, I've got it.
A little bit of this is background and is new. I'm not going to speak a lot to what is already in the papers. But first of all, thank you for entertaining our variance application, and Happy New Year to everyone. We have, we're here to ask for a number of variances, which you read out. They're made necessary by a change in use. The use was previously a general office use, although it was largely medical as well. And we are now proposing a comprehensive treatment center for substance abuse. As I'm sure many of you are aware, it remains a big problem in New Hampshire, and we had over 485 deaths in 2022, and projecting similar deaths this year. And you know, I think it's just important to emphasize that this is a critical use, and to enable us to do it, we actually do need these parking variances. But it's an important use, and it's also a use that is allowed by right in this particular zoning district. So we're hopeful that the board will approve our variances. The next one. Property is located at 89 North State Street. As you can see, it's a very long, thin parcel of property. At its widest, at the back, it's 65 feet. At the front, it's 61.25 feet. It's about 275 feet long. The length actually poses a lot of the problems that you have with conforming to the current parking requirements, which were not designed with this type of property in mind. Next slide, please. This shows the property in relation to the downtown area, inclusive of North Main Street, where there is public, transportation, a bus stop, and the various parking lots in the area, including the State Street and the, which is the other one, Pleasant Street Garage. Not Pleasant Street, but State Street and Pleasant Street, yeah. So there's plenty of public parking in the area. Next slide, please. Next. One before that. Oh. Okay, well, is there one with a picture of the building? It seems to be different order.
Is this maybe the old presentation you said?
Yes. It's okay. If you can find it, great. I just wanted to show people that there is a building on this property already that dates to 1900. It's a beautiful red brick building. There you go. It occupies a lot of the property. It's located in the corner and reduces the available width in that 61.25 feet of frontage for an access way. So Concord CTC proposes to renovate mostly the interior of this building and put in about 1.4 to 1.55 million in the renovations. The use is allowed by right. I think it's important that the zoning ordinance specifically spelled out substance use disorder treatment. A lot of ordinances I see don't, they just lump it in there with clinics providing outpatient procedures, but in this case, Concord took care to spell that this is a use that's allowed here. It does, however, change the parking requirements under the zoning ordinance. The parking for general office was one spot per 300 square feet of gross floor area, which is calculated quite widely in Concord. And the new use requires one space per 225 square feet. So as a result, we need 23 spaces, and there are only 20 spaces in the parking lot. And the parking lot itself really doesn't conform to many of the design standards. Next slide, please. These provisions of the zoning ordinance make it clear that if you change from one use to another use that has a greater parking requirement under the table of parking requirements in the ordinance, you aren't automatically grandfathered, so to speak, and you're supposed to conform with the new parking requirements, which is why we need to ask for variance relief. Not to belabor this point, but there are a lot of other uses that would have faced the same problem on the same property. All of those uses would require variances from the parking requirements because they increase the parking usage. Next slide, please. Prior to filing our variance application, we did a little research to make sure it was within the realm of what this board considers, and we found just over the last year, 89 Fort Eddy, where the board decreased the allowed parking by 57. 115 Main Street, where the variance decreased the required parking by 13, and 303 Sheep Davis Road, where the variance decreased parking requirement by 12. I think with respect to the variance criteria in our parking, in our lot-specific area, you know, we're in an area with a lot of parking, a lot of on-street, a lot of public parking, a lot of public transportation, and I think, you know, a decrease by 3 parking spaces is not a lot to ask, and I think it's well within the purview of this board and the purposes of the ordinances. We also prepared a detailed survey or plan to the point of measuring each parking lot space, so we knew exactly what kind of variances we need. And on that basis, prepared the variance request list. You could go to the next slide, please.
Before you go to the next slide, can I just ask?
Yeah.
I don't have the application in front of me because it was in last month's packet. So I see all the parking spaces,
Yes.
and what is that at the end that's keeping you from adding more?
It's green space. It's green space.
Okay.
And it's
I think it's at 100 required feet of green space.
It's the required amount.
I don't know. It might be less. It might be more than required, but I think the point is it's green space, and while we probably could put parking back there, it's not necessary. I should add to our testimony, and you can corroborate, but generally the people who use this facility are doing ride sharing or Medicaid rides or something like that. So while we're talking about, you know, the parking requirements in the zoning ordinance are generic. The same requirements apply if you're this part of town or Sheep Davis Road or Loudon Road, and they're generic use, but we don't feel like the actual need for parking is going to increase here. So, and that green space is a nice buffer for the residential use on the other side, so we'd prefer to keep it green if possible. I'm not going to go through these one by one, fortunately. That would go over my 10-minute time, but I think you can see that the nature of the variance requested are pretty de minimis, even though we go to them in detail. 3 less parking spaces. You know, the parking lot stalls vary, but it's usually we're about 1.1 feet to 3 feet short in some areas. At most, we're 0.9 inches. I'm sorry, 0.9 feet. Not wide enough. The aisle width, it's just 1.2 feet off the required aisle width. So the other types of requirements are ones we can't really solve, like we're in an area where technically you're supposed to have a driveway that's 200 feet away from your neighbor's driveway or from the intersections. We can't possibly meet that. And none of these properties in this neighborhood can. So lastly, I guess I just want to address the criteria. You know the criteria well, and I'm not going to go into it in detail, just hit a few points. It's a lawn, narrow property, like I said, 65 feet, where you'd actually try to comply with the code and put in parking perpendicular to the side lot lines and the aisle, the width required by the code, you would actually require over 70 feet, almost, I think it's 74 feet, maybe 72 feet. Anyway, it's more feet than we have width on the property, so we can't really comply with that. And if we reconfigure the parking lot just to do parallel parking on the sides, you're going to lose like 8 or 9 parking spaces, right? We feel like the parking in the area with the School Street garage and the State Street garage is sufficient, as well as all the parking in the sides in this particular area property of Concord there's plentiful parking, you know, and we think it's important to emphasize that the use is allowed by right. We think it's allowed by right in this area for a purpose because it takes a use that is far too often marginalized and put out on industrial areas and puts it in a core center with lots of public transportation, walkable sidewalks and parking. And I think it's in keeping with the intent of the bylaw that variances be granted to allow the existing parking lot to remain as well, changing the use to a much-needed treatment center. So with that, if anybody has any questions or wants me to go into more detail on various criteria, I'm glad to. But
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question for Tracy.
Yes.
Given that they have some space behind the building that's not currently paved, could they designate that space as available if they need it and go for a CUP from the planning board?
I think that is a required buffer. Let me just double check because it's in, the next property is residential.
If I may, I can confirm
Yeah.
it's residential. And in fact, the back part of that property that you're pointing to, that's green space, is actually in the residential zone. So under the bylaw, we could technically, there's kind of what we call a slop over provision. You can take your use that's not allowed into that zone and extend back there, but I think the preference is just to keep it as a buffer from residential, and it may be required.
I need to know whether it's required before I can make a decision.
I'm just, you know, you can't find it when somebody's waiting for you.
No, that's standard operating procedure.
And I can add that while we're a health center, we're not a health center that's just open to the public for walk-ins per se, the way an urgent care is. So we have a specific patient population. We know who's coming and going each day. We know how many patients we expect each day. And we also have the ability to provide scheduled appointment times to reduce the flow of traffic. So should we find that a lot of people are coming in the morning and they have their own vehicles, we would be able to limit how many that is to not pose any issues in the parking lot.
Is there on-street parking over there? There is?
Yeah.
Both sides or just one side?
Just the opposite side, but also on all the side streets. And if you just drive through there, I've been there 5 or 6 times, and there's always on-street parking available, metered parking. You know, to the extent it's relevant, we don't mind putting parking back there if it's allowed. We just don't think it's necessary. But if you wanted to make a decision saying should there be parking needs or demands exceeding our expectation, we would pave it. It's just, we still need the variances because those parking spaces would not conform to, we couldn't, given the width of the lot, we can't make anything conform to the actual requirements.
On the
Right.
dimensions?
Yeah.
And the distances,
What did you say? I didn't hear you.
and the distances.
Oh,
There's, because it's within 50 feet, there is a requirement to shield the lighting from the parking lot. And so, it doesn't require a specific buffer standard, but it is required to shield the parking lot from the residential district.
okay. Thank you.
Looking at the dimensions, 19 plus 19 plus 5 plus 5 plus 24 feet equals 72 feet. That's the minimum you need to comply with the dimensions, and we don't have that square footage or linear footage.
You'd have to go back, if you were to add on to it, I think you'd have to go back the width of your existing paving by 36 feet. Excuse me, by 18 feet, correct?
Yeah, so if you wanted to, it's just 3 spots. Yeah, so we'd have to go,
18 feet, 2 on one side, 1 on the other.
yep. And those are each 19 foot by 8 feet, I think? Yeah, that's right.
Can you go back to the survey slide? Is that line where roughly where the green space boundary is, the sort of diagonal one that's not perfectly parallel with the end of the lot, is that
Yes.
the district line?
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions from the board? Anything else you'd like us to know?
No, just to reiterate, we think the parking is sufficient for our use, but if people, if the board wants additional parking spaces back there and we can do it, we're happy to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition to it? Any comments from code enforcement?
Nothing additional.
With that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have a request for a variety of variances, all related to the appellant's desire to maintain the existing parking lot. They are 3 parking spaces short. We heard testimony that they did not want to expand the number of parking spaces because they did not want to invade the green space. And we heard testimony that the existing dimensions of the lot don't permit regulation parking lot dimensions. Brenda, how do you look at this one?
I'm okay with it. I mean, it's only 3 spaces different. They have the room to expand it if they find the need, and they're not taking walk-ins. I think that makes a huge difference, that they're not going to have a rush of people that they're not expecting, so they can manage their flow. And the lot size isn't even wide enough for most of the requirements that they're asking for variances on.
Very good. Laura?
I don't have any issue with the dimensional variances because I think there's clearly a hardship that arises from the current configuration of the lot. And I think to the extent that the parking lot has existed, it's not going to change the character of the neighborhood or diminish surrounding property values. I do have a problem with the variance about the number of spaces. This variance runs with the land. It's not just them. Any other healthcare type facility could take it over and not have those 3 spaces. I don't see anything from the lot or the property that makes it a hardship to install those 3 spaces. So I would not be in favor of the number of spaces variances, but the other ones I think are fine.
I'm inclined to agree. I just think it's the domino effect of needing the other variances kind of no matter what they propose.
You agree with Laura?
Yeah.
Nick?
If we enforced all the dimensional requirements that they're required to have, I think I read testimony in here that they would be down to 12 lots. And I think that creates a hardship on the community by having those folks then park on the street. I'm inclined to support the 20 space requirement.
Okay. I also am in agreement with my colleagues that the dimensional requirements, I think they clearly have a hardship. The configuration of the lot is what it is, and there's not much they can do about that other than not park there, which is not an acceptable result. I don't see a reason why the other 3 parking spaces couldn't be added at the end of the lot, which means it's not the minimum variance. And so I would be inclined to support. We should probably divide this since there seems to be some difference of opinion on that. But I would be inclined to support a motion to approve the dimensional variances and not the number of parking space variances. Would anyone care to make, why don't we start with, which one of this alphabet soup of variances was the one that had to do with the number of?
It's listed in the applicant's on page
It should be the E one.
E,
page
Yeah.
5. Yeah.
as in 28710E?
2872.
Yes, the first one.
Yep.
Okay.
2.
Oh, 2872.
Yep.
Okay. So let's take up 2872, assuming I have that right, which is the intent is that we're talking about the number of spaces. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I will move to deny the variance with regard to the number of spaces.
Is there a second? All eyes are on you. No, you don't support it?
No.
Okay, so you don't want to second it?
No.
Okay. And Nick, you don't want to second it? All right. And Brenda, you don't want to second it? Well, then I guess it goes down for lack of a
That's
second. In that case, we will, I'll ask for a counter motion.
I'll motion.
Okay. To
approve.
Okay, to approve, we're still dealing just with 2872.
Correct.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay?
Nay. The vote is
4 to 1.
3-2.
3-2.
3-2, oh.
Yeah. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. Net result is the variance is granted. Now, all the various others, numbers and letters that had to do with the dimensions. Do I hear a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. That means that all the variances requested are granted to that case. Which brings us to the next case this evening, which is case 0130-2023, 11 Pearly Street, in a UT Urban Transitional District. What I should probably do is, before I move on to that, but please come forward. Case 0131-2023, 285 Loudon Road, the appellants have requested that that case be deferred until next month. Can I hear a motion to defer that case, to recess that case until our February meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, so if you're here for that case, you need not remain. We won't be hearing that case this evening. And I also apologize if you've had to sit through 2 cases waiting for yours and it didn't get heard, but we'll be back to that one next month. The next one is 0130-2023, 11 Pearly Street, as I said, UT Urban Transitional District, 11 Pearly Street LLC are the owners. The applicant seeks a special exception pursuant to Article 2824J, Table of Principal Uses, for a change of use from retail H1 to service business I1. Additionally, the applicant seeks variances from the following parking requirements. 28.7G setbacks and restrictions to allow parking to the property line where a 10-foot setback is required. Surfacing and drainage to allow the existing non-conformities to persist. Curbing and guardrails to allow the existing nonconformities to persist. Illumination of parking areas to allow the existing nonconformities to persist. Separation of driveways in non-residential districts to allow a driveway on a collective street to be less than 200 feet from the street intersections and adjacent driveways. And parking area landscape standards to allow the existing nonconformities to persist. I swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do. Thomas Talbot.
I beg your pardon?
Thomas Talbot.
What would you like us to know, sir?
Sorry. The existing property is retail. We're looking to change it to services for a hair salon. We anticipate 4 to 6 stylists working at a time with respective number of customers. Per the UOA documents, we have 12 assigned parking spots. We won't have any on-street parking problems anticipated. We only plan to make changes to the interior of the building and to update the exterior painting and some siding.
Questions from the board?
Are all of the variances that you're requesting to keep existing nonconformities? Are you making any changes?
We are not anticipating making any changes to the parking lot.
I do have a question for Dr. Hutton.
Please.
Why is it that it's a special exception to change the type of use, but all the other changes require the variance?
So when you do a change of use, the parking section is specific that when you change a use, you have to come into compliance fully with all of the parking and access and circulation requirements. And if it needs site plan, it has to go through the site plan process for those changes. If it does not require site plan, it has to go through the city engineer. But either way, you have to come into full compliance whenever you do a change of use. So all of these parking lot variances we're seeing is because they're changing the use, which requires the parking lot to come into compliance, similar to the last variance you just looked at.
But then the change of use in the special exception standard, it would, if they were just starting from scratch, would would a service business not be allowed in this zone?
It's a special exception use.
Oh, okay.
It's one special exception use to another special exception use, but
Got it. So that part doesn't matter that there's a change. They would need a special exception for this type of use regardless.
correct.
Got it.
If I could add, the parking lot is existing. It's shared with a exercise business. Taylor and the American Legion, there is no room to expand or change the parking lot to accommodate all of the parking requirements for the facility.
But you have enough parking.
Yes, there's ample parking for the businesses that are currently there, plus the anticipated.
I have not done a parking analysis on this lot.
But there's enough parking for this business? The 12 spaces?
I have not done a parking analysis on this lot because it is a shared parking lot.
Okay.
We did not do individual calculations for each business because it's a condoed property.
Okay.
Oh, it's a condo, so the condo owns the lot, and then the condo association has the division of who gets how many spaces?
Correct. We are allotted 12.
So in a condo situation, is it, since the association could theoretically change the number that without the city getting notice, how does that
So
get
usually
calculated?
we would calculate each individual primary use, its parking requirement, and add them together. But this was, again, in the past, with changes of use, there's been a little bit of difference in how it's been treated in the past, so staff is just kind of coming to how we're going to do these in the future in terms of the calculations, and so this application was kind of caught in the middle of that staff decision how we were going to treat them. And I don't have the data on the other buildings that belong to the condo association to be able to do the calculations, or I didn't at the time of the application.
And how many square feet is this building?
It's 2,500 square feet.
So the requirement would be 1 per 200 square feet, so 12 or 13. We're in the ballpark.
Right, but again, they can change.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
This is a unique parcel. I never would have known that was a condo.
And that lot's been configured that way for 35 years that I'm aware of. Long time. Other questions from the board?
Yes,
Please.
Do you know how many spots are allotted to the current retail business that's there?
I imagine it would also be 12. Looking at the UOA documents, it says that unit 11 Pearly Street is allotted 12 parking spaces.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Other questions?
So, to your knowledge, presumably, all these nonconformities on your variance requests also are nonconformities applying to the other lot, to the other condo owners as well, right? Okay.
All set? Is there anything else you'd like us to know?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but it. Have a seat, if you'd sign in, please, and also give us your name.
It's Kathy Allen,
Kathy,
correct.
last name?
Allen, A-H-L-I-N. I just wanted to mention that. I don't have a copy of the deed here, but those spaces are recorded in their deed for that part of the condo, so they couldn't change that at any time, the board of directors, because they're deeded spots. They're not, each spot is not, it doesn't say this spot, this spot individually. It just says that you have 12 spots and that's in the deed.
But you can amend the condominium declaration to change that, could you not?
That's a deed just to the owner.
Okay, thank you.
That's a big difference, right?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition? Is there any comment from code enforcement?
Non-additional note.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have a request to grant two different types of relief in this case. One is a special exception, which we'll take up first, which is for the use. The criteria for a special exception were outlined in and answered in the application, having to do with the suitability and compatibility of the use. It's assumed that it is allowed otherwise. Any thoughts on this one, Nick?
It meets the criteria for special exception. I see nothing in the 9 items that we'd have an issue with.
Jim?
Yeah, I think, as you observed, this is a unique piece of property. It's operated this way for 30 or 40 years. As I understand it from the application and testimony, it's a mix of activity takes place there between retail and service and fraternal. So I don't think it's a major change in the neighborhood.
Laura?
I think the criteria for a special exception are all met based on the materials in the application and the testimony we heard tonight.
Andrew?
I agree that it is a change in use. It could have a slight impact, but I don't think it'll be material given the total commercial kind of, or at least transitional nature of that neighborhood. So I definitely think the special exception criteria are met.
All right. I agree with my colleagues. Do I hear a motion to grant the special exception?
I will move to grant it. Do you need more findings that we've given you?
No, I think I'm good for a special exception.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The special exception is granted. And now we come to the parking variances, almost all of which, I think, if not all of which, were to permit an existing non-conforming use to continue. How does this one look to you, Andrew?
So I'm a little challenged by it, at least as to some of them. Kind of dividing these up conceptually, some of these I don't think there's much they can do about due to the configuration and the kind of existing nature of the lot, like the setbacks, the separation of driveways, probably the parking landscape standards. So that would be 1, 4, 5, and 6. No, I'm sorry, 1, 5, and 6. As to 2, 3, and 4, those could be addressed. That doesn't really per se have to do with the nature of the lot. However, the problem they're going to have is it's a condo, so they can't just unilaterally make those changes. And I don't really know exactly how to treat that, because it could be unfair to kind of force them to make changes they can't make, but at the same time, that almost kind of invalidates the code, which I don't think we should do either. So I'm a little up in the air as to those 3.
Laura?
I don't have any concerns about any of the dimensional requests. The parking lot is there. It has functioned presumably well for the many years it's been there. There's absolutely nothing they can do on their own to change it or to fix it or to address any of these issues. So I think there's a hardship. I think there's no change to the neighborhood. I think it's not going to diminish surrounding property values, and I think it would be an injustice to deny the variances.
Very good. Jim?
Yeah, I agree with Laura's observations in this, and I think, if I'm not incorrect, this is a one-way street.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, and we granted similar relief to the exiting onto a collector street for the Ledger Bank a few months ago, so I think it's consistent with our decisions in this neck of the woods, in this neighborhood.
I think we also did for the apartment building that's across the street. It's down on South Main Street. It was a similar situation. It was a one-way street, and they were close to the edge. Nick?
I'm good with it.
Okay. I am as well. I don't have a problem with any of the requests here. Andrew, would you be more comfortable if we divide this up?
No, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
I am in agreement 2, 3, and 4. I mean, I've had some thoughts on it, but I'm willing to go along with the others. Because I think just intuitively it makes sense that they should be able to keep their existing.
Very good. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I will move that we approve all of the dimensional variances for the reasons we've discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variances are granted. And that brings us to case 0132, 2023, 30 River Road, RM Medium Density Residential District and Flood Hazard Overlay District. 30 River Road Properties LLC are the owners. The applicants seek a variance from Article 28.85B1, continuation of non-conforming structures, to construct a 7 by 22 foot addition on a single family dwelling. Gentlemen, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but? If you jot your names on the sign-in sheet and also announce yourselves for the record, that would be helpful.
We will do that. I'm John Bisson from Krona, Bisson and Zelinski on behalf of the property owner and applicant.
My name is Pete Grenier. I'm also on behalf of the current owner.
Whenever you're ready, fire away.
All right, so January 3rd came up pretty quick with the holidays in the way. So we have some paper submissions that we didn't have a chance to get them to you folks before. The first thing that's going around is an update on a letter that was presented when we were last here from McKeon Appraisal on the issue of diminution of value. He issued an opinion in the prior request that was here the last time, saying that there was no diminution in value as a result of the request. This is an update on that, essentially saying that the reason that we're here tonight, which is limited to that stoop addition, that additional piece in the back, also does not affect the values of neighboring properties. The other package of documents that I'm sending around are photos that I actually took today, because whenever we're talking about a variance, I think it's important to get perspective of what things look like. And what you see is a series of photos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all from the addition on the property that we're talking about, looking up towards the road. So that's the view from our parcel back towards the neighbor. And it's basically various, you're getting a little bit closer each time. But that's the view from our perspective, up towards the road. And then photo 6 is the reverse. It's taking going up to the boundary line with that abutter, looking back at our property, which I think is important for that perspective of what's happening. And when you look at photo 6, you can see the area that we're talking about, which is, it's on the right side of the photo. You can see the white door and that little sort of structure that's appended to the front of the building. In the application, we call it the stoop, whatever you want to call it, kind of that additional space. Behind that, you see in photos 7 and 8, just a close-up of what we're talking about. So you can see the electrical panel, and then from the electrical panel to the right is that area that we're talking about. And then on photo 8, it's the opposite side, the same addition. And what you can see there is that, first of all, at the bottom, there's this rather attractive copper drip edge that I thought was nice. Below that, there's those sort of off-white panels. Those are just panels. So this property is on footings. So the whole issue that brought us here in the first place was the flood hazard overlay district that we're in. And so if you remove those panels, there's no foundation. So it's on footings so that the water will flow freely and it doesn't create any issues. And the reason the issues that were addressed at the last meeting, raising the structure, was to some degree the applicant agreed to raise it. All of those things brought it into compliance really with the height issue. So really what we're talking about is just that piece that's appended to the back or the front of the unit, depending on your perspective. So I thought that perspective would be important. So we're here for the variance, and why are we here? Someone started this structure prior to the current owner, and without the benefit of a permit, perhaps. The history of the permit from the prior owner with respect to this structure is a little bit confused. what is on record with the city is there's not a heck of a lot of detail that we've been able to see. So we're not sure what actually the prior owner got by way of a permit. But when the current owner purchased the property, it was pretty much framed the way that it is, such that and I could have Mr. Grenier talk to it, but the area from the electrical panel back, that sort of sliver that goes like this, was already framed in. And then there's this other piece with the lower roof that was also part of the framing, such that we're basically kind of getting the approval that someone should have got historically before. So I'm always mindful, because I'm sure you've been here where people come asking for a variance when they really should have done it right in the first place, the permit. So I'm very mindful of the message that is sent when you allow that to happen. But here, it was a prior owner. The current owner bought it with the understanding that a permit had been issued. The records at the city are, again, less than stellar on that issue. And so the way that I ask you to look at it is, had we come, what would the consideration have been if we had done it correctly? And really what we're asking for is that additional space. It complies really with the flood overlay on the issue of it's on footings, so the water can flow freely underneath. So really it's the additional area that we're looking for. And so then you get into the variance criteria that I know you're all familiar with. Is it really in the spirit of the ordinance? Is it consistent with a single family home to have that additional space? Is it in the character of the neighborhood? This structure has been there for 100 years on the river. I think the last time there was a public hearing, some neighbor or somebody said this property looks better than it ever has. So it's sort of bringing it up to sort of today's reality. And you can see the view from that owner's perspective, that neighbor's perspective. We really are enhancing the property and essentially asking for the relief that someone should have asked for before our current ownership. And I think it's consistent. There's not really any issue with value of other properties. It's a single family residence. So I don't really want to belabor any of the variance criteria unless there's particular questions on any.
Am I correct that the reason for the variance is an expansion of a non-conforming use?
Correct.
Not anything about the expansion itself?
Correct.
That's correct, Tracy.
Non-conforming use and non-conforming structure, yep.
Yeah.
Can you hit me over the head with the hardship?
Really the hardship is because the structure already exists the way that it does when the owner purchased it. So now the hardship would be the Pelham, I'm trying to remember the other party, the Pelham case that says requiring sort of economic waste, in other words, going in and ordering the restoration of the property to its pre-situation would be considered a waste. So really the hardship is created because the prior owner kind of went ahead, and now we have it, and here it is.
Okay, thanks.
But didn't you say a couple minutes ago that you want us to look at this as if the work hadn't been done, or maybe I misunderstood that?
Well, right. So if we had been here,
Yeah.
right. So the question then would have been, would this expansion, how would it have been inconsistent with your ordinance? I suppose you would have asked, what's the hardship? Why do you need the extra space? The issue that, remember, the ordinance issue that we're talking about is the flood hazard overlay ordinance. So the issue is whether the water can go underneath it, right? So that it's really consistent with that. It's on footers. So, I mean, I understand what you're hearing is that on the one hand I'm saying, well, treat me as if I was there, and now I'm here. So now the situation is really you're going to just order the destruction of this home to restore it, and I don't see any benefit to that.
And Tracy, the abutters' concerns about the increased space on the second floor, that's completely legal, right?
Not so much.
Okay.
Remember, this has nothing to do with floodproofing.
Right.
Has nothing to do with the elevation of the building. This is a non-conforming use in the district, so any expansion of the non-conforming use would not have been permitted.
Okay. So
Without
are they
coming.
coming back for a variance for the expansion of the second floor? Have we
I
decided
have not
that's?
seen a request.
Have you issued a notice of violation?
We have not.
Okay.
So what, so I'm a little slow on this one. What's the non-conforming use?
Residential
fact
structures
that
are
it's there.
non-conforming in the flood hazard overlay district.
So
Hasn't it always
what's the what use is allowed?
Very few if they're not water dependent. Residential is absolutely not allowed in a 100-year flood.
So so the use is just,
There are some
Like
commercial
fishing.
uses that are allowed in the 100-year flood, but residential is never allowed in a 100-year flood.
got it, okay.
And part of the structure is actually in the floodway.
So the,
But just, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead, Jim.
but the structure was constructed before the flood hazard overlay district was created.
The original structure.
Yes, that's what I was asking.
Okay.
And the issue of the floodway that Dr. Hutton just brought up, we're on the opposite side. So this expansion is on the opposite side of the structure, further away from the river.
Right, I was speaking to
Right.
Ms. Spector Morgan's inquiry about the,
Yes, have you seen what the abutters submitted?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just asking about those issues.
Since you raised the issue of economic waste, what, probably exhibit my lack of construction background, what would be involved if this is denied? I mean,
So this
is
photo,
there a way to detach that, or is it?
you'd have to go back, as I understand it. All of this would have to come
It
off.
would come off from basically the electric line, this little part of the roof here, and this little piece here. This is actually sitting on the footings.
Right, and that was, again, that was all there. And there is some, and perhaps Dr. Hutton can talk about the permit situation, because I'm a bit confused about what the prior owner might have gotten and who approved it and how it got approved and why that file may or may not be available, I'm not sure. So there is some confusion about the history of what was asked for.
so that June 21 photo in your application is actually a photo that was taken when we submitted the notice of violation on the building. So there was a notice of violation previously that there were additions and outbuildings that were built without permits, and that was noticed in 21. So the outbuildings were since removed, so that piece came into compliance, but the additions were never part of that permit.
And so this June 24th picture you have here from 2021, you took that picture and you sent a notice of violation
The
without other violations.
Right, the then chief building official was taking a picture of the notice being posted on the door.
Okay.
That's the only reason I have that picture, because they were taking a picture of the notice. I'm like, wow, this is perfect, because I happen to take one at the same angle.
And that's a notice that was sent to the prior owner.
Correct.
So the picture as of this June 2021 picture,
That was the prior owner and what they were permitted to do.
but the home as it looks in that condition is,
That's what was pre-existing.
at
That
least
was
the
what
home
was
part, that part is.
That's what was pre-existing,
So
correct.
that is in compliance at that point,
At that point.
as to this building.
Right, that was the existing structure that was in compliance that the permit was issued on. So everything since then that is additional was not permitted.
So they corrected what you cited them for, but then started a whole nother non-complying.
It appears so, yes.
Wow.
Well, that straightens it out.
And there we are.
Other questions from the board? There was a mention of a second floor development that was also an expansion that was not approved. From the photograph, it looks like there is a second floor on the 2021 building. Is there, what,
No,
So
that's, in the rear there always was. It's the front that I
Oh,
didn't
it
put
doesn't
in
show
the-
in this photo?
It doesn't show in that photo, that is correct.
All right.
And that's what the abutters, the pink
Yeah.
abutters submitted.
Okay. Got it. Anything else you'd like us to know?
I don't think so.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Is there anyone else anyone who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition to it?
Oh, David Belser.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you, sir.
Roseanne Bonravage.
Last name?
Roseanne Bolavage.
If we can figure our seating out.
Yeah. Just keep moving till the music stops.
Sorry.
If you would, oh, yes.
Yeah, we've been here before.
Yep.
First of all, regarding in favor or not in favor, Mr. Grenier actually stopped by the house this morning. They were taking the pictures. He sat down with both us and the other immediate butters. We are no longer necessarily against the granting of the variance. To say that we are in favor of it would be, it's a bit of a stretch. But there are, after sitting with Mr. Grenier, if we can have assurances that our concerns are going to be handled, then we're not necessarily against having the variance granted. So you don't have
What are your concerns with regard to the addition?
That's in the paper, and I'll go through that. I mean, my intent originally tonight was to come down here and say these are all of our concerns. Yeah. And as far as so we provided a bunch of information, photos, et cetera, that stuff, to the best of my knowledge, to the best of my ability, accurately portrays the changes that have been made since the house started being worked on in 2021. And that was my intent of providing that. Correction of comments last month, doesn't matter. Really, we're well beyond that. The other point about whether or not we were motivated because we wanted to grab the house and develop it ourselves, we had first right of refusal. We didn't ask, we passed. We didn't want to own the house. So our concerns were ownership, and you guys are going to have to sort that out and kind of figure out what it all means anyways. But because Mr. Grenier has been involved in the project from the beginning, and to my understanding, he's not the current owner, it's Mr. Faria, but he is here representing the ownership of the property. So that's, to me, that's very confusing. What we were told today is that Mr. Faria is the owner. It's in a trust with Faria's name on it. And that and actually we were told this after the last meeting, that Mr. Faria intends to move into the house, reside there. He intends to use it as his full-time residence, that the house will remain a single-family property, that he also does not intend to run any sort of intensive business out of it. He's a framer. I would like to know that what we have been told today, and I have no reason to believe is not true, but if in fact that this is really intended to be Mr. Faria's residence for the foreseeable future, I mean, obviously it's a house, he can sell it whenever he chooses, that's our number one concern was this would become a crazy vacation spot, it would become a rental, it would become a rehab house, who knows, I don't even know what's allowed in this, for these particular uses. He's also been, it's complicated because our interactions have been with Mr. Grenier. My understanding is that Mr. Faria is Portuguese and does not do well speaking English. We did meet him. I don't even know if he's here. He is here tonight. So perhaps they can come back and explain all this, and whether or not that makes a difference into what you decide. That's really kind of where we're at. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Because I'm looking at the ownership history, at least what we have, it says it's currently owned by 30 River Road Properties LLC, but as of June 2021, when the prior non-compliance was issued, it was owned by B&B Contracting, but I remember reference to a specific person. Who was the owner at the time of the prior outbuildings?
As I'm sure you people know, builders and LLCs and properties changing around, etc. My understanding, and I have no reason to believe that this is not correct, and it's in the record. Mr. Grenier bought the property initially from the person we sold it to years and years ago. He then sold it to Mr. Robleski, who was the B&B.
Robleski, that's right.
And Mr. Robleski, and at the time when he did that, he held the mortgage on it. However that transaction works, Mr. Grenier held it. Mr. Robleski, frankly, was a piece of work. I think that's pretty obvious from everything that you guys have seen as far as what work was done, his regard for ordinances, his regard for following the rule. You know, it's pretty clear that Mr. Robleski probably shouldn't be doing business in New Hampshire, but that's not for me to decide, or, you know, that's not what we're discussing here as far as I understand. Well, just because he's a complete disregard of you know, any, you know, come down here and ask you guys for, you know, can I do this particularly? So Mr. Grenier then, well, actually, you know, the next transaction is to the trust, which is in Mr. Faria's name. So the house is Mr. Faria's at this, house and property are Mr. Faria's at this point. And based on the insurances and the discussion we had today, you know, there's one of the things was the fact that you know, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms. There's my understanding is his son is crippled and probably in a wheelchair. I don't, you know, we haven't had the conversation, so that makes a lot more sense. You know, frankly, it seems like we're nosy neighbors, but you know, we live there. We both work from home. You know, we just see what goes on and on. So the concern about that was that implies it's more of a different type of property. It's
And the
not really,
shared right-of-way affects 3 abutting neighbors directly.
Yeah.
So extra cars, extra people do have a big impact on the neighbors.
And, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it strikes me that the variance request is because of the flood zone and therefore that you can't expand on it. But everyone in there essentially is grandfathered in. No one there could be there if they were building new now, and no one can expand, and that would seem to be an advantage of the neighborhood that you know, there's intensity. So
exactly.
although theoretically the variance is based on the flood zone, it's not. It's really the increased density that would be the concern. Is that fair to say? And you might not mind about one additional porch, but you don't want to set
a way of looking at it.
precedent of people just being able to add on for any reason.
You know, the point of it is because obviously you want to avoid the insurance risks, et cetera, of houses being flooded, et cetera. But as a side effect, living in that neighborhood, it's very, very difficult to get any permission to do any additional stuff, and with good reason. And I've been there 40 years. You know, plenty of people who have, you know, gone through that process and, you know, had to scale back their intentions. By and large, you know, I think the zoning board has been mostly reasonable in their decisions. You know, I myself have done work, improved properties, et cetera, and have had to live with the decisions of the board. So anyways, it's kind of odd being in this position, but I just want to express that we are not against, you know, the owners. We want assurances that what we are being told is actually going to happen. I don't know what conditions, if any, can be put on, or if they even need to be put on. But other than that, you know, we want a family to move in there and you know, to be low intensity on, you know, our existence.
Very good. Thank you very much.
We sign in.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in opposition to this appeal? Any comments from code enforcement?
Just one comment for the board. I know that what you can and can't condition is limited, but to speak to one of the concerns, the parking of a commercial vehicle on site would be, if, you know, for an off-premise occupation is a special exception in this district. So if they did want to do that, there are additional approvals that would be required. So in terms of that, at least there is that protection that exists in the ordinance for you.
Very good. Mr. Bisson, would you like to offer any factual clarification in response to what you've heard?
I think I just pick up where Dr. Hutton left off. Essentially, the zone itself provides the assurances that the neighbor really needs, right? Dr. Hutton told us that this is a non-conforming property in a very restrictive zone. Basically, I think she said nothing unless it's water related, is how she said it, would be approved as a matter of right. So that means that his his concern was no intensive business. We couldn't do that without coming back. There's all of the things, you know, multifamily, we couldn't do that if we didn't come back. The outbuildings that were a concern in 2021, at least on our property, have been removed. Some of the properties nearby have outbuildings that probably pre-exist and are fine, but to the extent that anything has happened since 2021, it really has been trying to ratchet this property back to some degree, bringing it closer to what would be appropriate, and the concerns that the neighbor has, all of which are legitimate, the shared access, they're really not, they don't really have anything to do with the variance. The variance is just that little space. We can't put a commercial vehicle in the driveway.
He's got a simple pickup truck. There's no lettering on it, nothing like that. His wife drives the vehicles.
But even if one showed up, then we'd have a code enforcement issue. So really, the much of the neighbors' concerns, all of which are legitimate because it is a very tight space in terms of the frontage, that as you go back towards the river, it kind of widens out dramatically, are protected. They're built in to the zone, really. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll declare the public testimony hearing or a portion of the hearing closed. We have a request to approve an expansion of a non-conforming use and a non-conforming structure, correct?
Yes, they're addressed in the same section when it's a dual
Okay.
nonconformity.
And the expansion consists of the entryway that you see on the right-hand side of the photograph that's dated August 23, 2023. We heard testimony that it sits on piers, does not have a continuous foundation, and would therefore not pose any additional flood hazard. I'm going to start this one with you, Mr. Monahan.
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on here, but very little of it is before us tonight. So I think, you know, the representation that most of the concerns are addressed by the current ordinances address most of it. So given the long history of various ownerships and the fact that the current owner is not responsible for the decision not to seek the proper permits or approvals, I think I'm comfortable with it. I think the consequences of not approving it are would be inappropriate.
Ms. Spector-Morgan.
I don't see the hardship. If they had come to us before, I would not have granted this variance, and so I can't grant it now. There's nothing about this hardship that arises from the land. It's all about the wants and the needs and the decisions that have been made by people. So while I think the other variance criteria are all easily satisfied, and I don't think it's a big deal variance, I can't vote in favor of it.
Understood. Mr. Winters.
I'm going to reluctantly support it, but I want to say, you know, I am sensitive. I think we all are about. Someone could easily take advantage of the system by, you know, one owner sort of flaunting the. And I'm not making any findings about the prior owner. He hasn't been here to defend himself, but obviously there have been pretty serious accusations and points made about the prior owner kind of essentially completely ignoring all regulations, flaunting the code, and then just saying, oh, I'm going to sell it to this entity, and it's hard for us to police if it's a related entity. You know, you could easily devise a way to kind of get around the code that way by just having one owner do this, then sort of turn it over to another owner who says, well, I didn't know anything about it. So I'm using a little judgment from the representations made by the current owner through his advocates, because it's been said that he doesn't speak English as first language. So I'm taking those representations, and also I think the neighbors who seem to be almost like have archivists of this area. They seem to have a lot of institutional knowledge, and they're kind of hesitantly vouching as well that it doesn't seem this is a conspiracy. So but I am cautious about that. As far as the hardship, I certainly see Laura's point on that. It's well taken, but I'm trying to sort of think of it as if this was a brand new request. As if I don't see this piece there, it's a very small piece.
So I'm going to say, well, it's a reasonable use to, just add a small kind of porch entry area to a home. It's pretty modest. So I see your point, but I'm willing to approve it.
Mr. Waller?
I agree with Andrew and Jim. It's unfortunate that these circumstances came about without the proper permitting process, but I don't see penalizing the current owner for somebody's mistakes in the past.
I'm inclined to agree with, well, let me say how I look at it, because it's slightly different from what I've heard. To me, the presence of the floodplain / floodway, which is the whole reason we're here talking about this, is similar in concept with regard to whether or not there's a hardship to an earlier case we heard this evening where the lot was too narrow for a regulation parking lot to be put in, but we found that a parking lot was a reasonable use, and we granted the variance on that basis. Here, I think the addition, which is rather modest and doesn't appear to me to create, from my limited understanding of the engineering involved, any additional hazard, which was what the whole floodplain, floodway question is about, is that there is a hardship because it's an existing building, it's a lot with constraints that the owner can't control, and a small addition for an entry, which is what it seems to be, strikes me as a reasonable use. So that's how I look at it. Would anyone care to make a motion for or again?
I'll move to approve the variance.
Is there a second?
A second.
Are you good, Dr. Hutton?
No, there's additional findings for the flood hazard district that haven't been addressed yet.
Okay, what are they?
I know you've talked about the flood issue, but the fact that the variance is the minimum necessary to afford relief, I didn't, if I missed it, I apologize, but I didn't hear anything to that effect.
I think I can extrapolate
Okay,
fairly directly from what I said in that it's a modest addition.
okay.
Imagining that to be an entry with a small mudroom off the side of it, having drawn about 700,000 of those in my career, I can tell you that it couldn't get a whole lot smaller and still function. So I think I would call that a minimum variance.
Okay.
Is there any other criteria that we have not?
No, I think I got them, but.
I know I'm not voting, but can I ask questions?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Expansion of a non-conforming use is the second floor too? It's not just the building's footprint?
Yes, but we're not considering that tonight. Because they haven't asked us to. But yes, it would be. At least that's correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Good question. All right, where were we? We were calling for a vote, I believe. Would anyone care to make a motion?
You just didn't.
Did we
you
have a
made
motion?
and you
No vote.
added information.
Oh, right, so we need a second?
I seconded.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Was the qualification that I offered consistent with the motion and the second?
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
The vote is 4-1 with Ms. Spector Morgan in the minority. The vote, or the variance is granted.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Does it make sense to take the next two out of order?
Well, let me see what the next two are.
Good point.
I had the same thought.
One's a sign variance and one's the mall.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Good call.
Thank you for the suggestion. And so we will do that. I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative and switch the agenda around a little bit, but we will hear both cases. So the next case will be case 0134, 2023, 50 South State Street, CU Urban Commercial District. 40 South State LLC are the owners, and the applicant seeks variances from Article 2869A, Table of Maximum Sign Dimensions for non-residential districts, and Article 2867D, Signs Prohibited Under this Ordinance, to allow a sign that is 87.5 square feet where 25 square feet is allowed, and for the sign to be painted directly on the front of the building. Swear to tell the truth and nothing else. Would you jot your name on that sign-in sheet and also identify yourself for the record, please?
Good evening, Board, and Happy New Year. My name is Josh Craigie. Joshua Craigie, C-R-A-G-G-Y. I own and operate the business located 56 State Street, Lucky's Barbershop. I also own the building, which is the 50 South State Street LLC. I'm here this evening about the painted brick ad sign that is on the outside of the building. How would you like me to proceed?
Well, why don't you hit on the high points of why you feel a variance is justified in this case?
Sure. So a little history on the building. It was erected in 1860. The building is pretty old. The exterior of the building, the brick which you can see in the photos here, was actually erected onto the building, I believe, in the 1960s. It was originally on another building on Main Street in Concord and was relocated and moved to the front of this building.
This is the sign that was removed you're talking about?
No, the bricks that are actually on the building themselves were formerly on a building that was torn down that was on Main Street in Concord.
Oh, I see.
And they were reused on the property in the 60s, I believe. They were repurposed. The sign that was up there was approximately about, counting the full frame of the sign, was about 6.5 feet roughly, top to bottom, and from the building out was close to 7 feet. It was a double-sided light box sign, and so it had two signs within that box. Within the box, the signs were approximately 5 or 5.5 feet by 5.5 feet square. So there was one facing on each direction going down the street. In the summer of 2022, as you know, the city began to revitalize downtown by removing and replacing all the granite curbing and the asphalt. We were very fortunate to be part of that project located in the south end. During that time period, and I have some other photos as well, if you'd like to see, but during that time period, there was a lot of revitalization and just kind of beautifying downtown Concord, and trying to keep up with that. I've been there, so I moved in 2007, just for a little backstory on me. I've been cutting hair in Concord for over 23 years now. I opened up Lucky's 16 years ago. And so as time's gone on, I've tried to improve the building as part of downtown and the neighborhood in general. But just like many other old buildings, it was definitely starting to show its age and wear. And during the removal of the granite blocking and asphalt, I believe it was 2 different times, General Services Department had mentioned that the sign that overhung over the property, which came close to the sidewalk, was leaning, and just, I think, out of general concern. I mean, it was a warning so much as just, hey, have you noticed that it looks like it's leaning, and also potentially for harm of the public. So in a combination of all that time period, had me looking at it and thinking about it and trying to keep up with the town and everything going on. It actually kind of motivated me to try to revitalize the front of the building. In doing so, the sign, like I said, that had been up there, I believe, I think at least from the 60s at the time, but it was affixed through the brick, and you could see where it was diminishing some of the brick and the integral structure of it. It was coming out. So taking the sign down, when thinking about moving forward, I'll be honest with you, the intention wasn't, I wasn't thinking so much of it as a sign, as because it was in my head. Now it was not an obstruction from the road from either way. It was a safety concern before, but also trying to match up with the spirit of the city. That same summer, when all the other work was being done downtown, it very much, I tried to favor other buildings and signs in Concord here, and I have some I could pass up for you, but one of my favorite signs that's always been in Concord off of Store Street is the Thompson and Hogue Agricultural Warehouse Building. And so I can pass some of these down.
Sure.
But so I'm a bit of a love letter Concord. I'm a bit of a historian and a fan of Concord, just a little back history. I'm born and raised here and spent my whole life here. And so, there's some for you. So now ghost signs, which you've seen throughout downtown Concord and Bagel Works and down behind by Cheers and other buildings. To me, it was very much in favor and ode or an homage to the other buildings and signs and yesterday of Concord. And so when I was putting it together, the letter type is called gas pipe. And that was a very much prominent use throughout Concord. If you look at some of the buildings in Concord today, and in a lot of the old photos downtown, that was a specific font that they used to use. So I tried to keep it in the spirit of what was not only used in Concord, but also relevant to the year of the building, to try to keep that in that sort of same historic kind of envelope. So that was the summer of 2022 that was put up. That was towards the end of the summer, going into fall. The sign, I guess, approximately based on the square footage of the sign that was up there previously was approximately 90 square feet, if you were to measure it. And this is actually less than that. So even though saying sign, I wasn't thinking of it, like I said, specifically as an obstruction or something that'd be attached to the building. And in fact, when people ask, why does the name of the business dwarf significantly the name, it clearly wasn't just for advertising purposes. It was much more in spirit of back in that time period in a lot of the buildings. It was much more, it was a combination of a proclamation of what the business did or offered for the service, but also it was almost marking what the building is for years to come. There's many other buildings and places in Concord where it might be a different business, but you go, oh, the old so-and-so building, there was so-and-so. So as much as I'd like that to still be a barbershop in 100 years, I always thought that it would age gracefully as well, that people would recognize that. So like I did a lot of work, a lot of history, a lot of really researching this to try to make it as much in tune with the town, but where it almost looked like it was always there. And like I said, I didn't, so I was unaware that it was not into code or the variance was needed. It was just mentioned several months ago this fall. I believe I spoke to Brian and Tracy, and they've been very helpful, by the way, getting me sorted out through this. I was completely unaware that it wasn't in compliance. That was news to me. So when they reached out, they've been very helpful trying to expedite the process. So I appreciate all the help moving forward. I have a letter as well from a brick mason as well. Basically, I don't know if you'd like to see it or read it. It's just a brief letter kind of stating on the condition of the brick. And
if you'd like it entered into the record, pass it along.
Sure, yeah.
If you would.
The contractor's name is Andrew Savegni, and he states that, thank you so much, and he states in his years of experience that affixing a new sign directly to the building or trying to update the previous double-sided light box sign would cause irreversible damage because of the weight potentially of the sign or the way that it would need to be affixed to the building. And based upon the age and the style of the hand-formed bricks that are currently laid out on the building, he said he also believes in experience that removing the painted brick would not only be compromising to the facade, but ultimately would cause ongoing damage to the bricks and mortar, which potentially could incur damage to the integral structure of the building. He mentioned that adding a similarly updated structure sign directly in the brick would impose excessive weight, issues that the aged brick could not withstand that weight, and in turn could cause potential harm to the public, either by the sign or if falling bricks or whatnot. He did state upon inspection that he's witnessed that the current state of the bricks and the several lights that are attached to it bear no ongoing impairment or damage and would not contribute to any further deterioration. He said he believes that the paint will help to assist to preserve and seal the bricks in their current condition and provide a layer of protection against all weather conditions for years to come. And that he believed that it satisfies the facade solution to meet quality standard and sustainability requirements in its current state. He did finish by saying to remove the applied paint or finish would impose an additional risk and unnecessary burden to the bricks and mortar based upon their age and condition, how old they are. So like I said, as far as being unaware of painted signs, not, I guess there's no, not precedent, but I guess there's no current allowance for that. Was unaware of that that same summer. Like I said, reflecting back on all the work being done in Concord, I believe they had repainted that Thompson and Hoke sign that summer, so that it definitely caught my eye and modeled it after that sign. It's pretty beautiful and bold. Also, a great, beautiful mural went by the Concord Antique Gallery on Store Street, which I think just is beautiful and vivid, and I think just adds a lot of...
I think we get your gist.
Yeah, but just that same summer, I believe we had several murals in Concord painted in addition to that sign. So it was all around that same time period that work was going on. So, like I said, I'm unaware of that it wasn't something that was allowed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. And square footage-wise, just based upon the measurements of what was on there, I believe was 2.5 square feet more than what's currently there now.
Wait, you don't have a picture?
I do have it, yeah. I pulled one off an old Google Earth. I do, yes.
We're talking about the old sign?
Yeah. It's a little hard to see. Here's a couple pictures for you. Just to give you an idea.
It'll probably refresh our memory.
Yeah.
Right.
That should be from every angle. So it used to hang out, like I said, from the building. It was approximately 7 feet, roughly, measuring from the building outwards over the entrance of the business in the building. The protruding near the sidewalk, which that has all been updated since they tore up the granite curbing as well. So now there's no sign affixed to the building or anything that hangs out over the sidewalk or underneath over people's heads at all.
I'm still new to the ordinance. Can I ask where 25 square feet comes from? Because I'm seeing 40.
Because it's based on the building frontage, the linear frontage of the building. So underneath the table, there's a section that says that it's maxed at the table or 1 foot per foot of building frontage.
And I'm not sure if that had changed because that was, when I first moved into the building, that was the same light box with the same structure that I used. And the two signs were actually I actually reversed them when I had them updated and went through the city initially.
The light box was 30 square feet because you only calculate one side.
His prior sign.
Oh.
His prior sign
Okay,
was
because there
only
were
30 square feet.
Oh, okay. So there were two signs, but each sign was approximately either 5 or 5.5 by 5.
Right. So that's 30
So
square.
so there'd be 20, or yeah, for each one. Yeah.
So did he have a variance or because he was 5?
I think the 30 square foot was legally non-conforming.
And I.
Oh, it would.
Right.
Even
but
if
now,
even if it's a different business, you can come in and take theirs. If you buy the building, you can.
right,
use
because it
their
has the
sign.
frame already.
Their
That's
sign.
how the overhanging signs are. But again, this is much larger than that.
So yeah. So sorry, I didn't realize I counted
That's
as
okay.
one. But so based on, I guess the measurements I did, I thought it was within the same parameters, size of what was up there.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, do you own the building?
I do. I do. Yeah. So I rented the building.
Oh, that's fine, yes.
Oh, that was just good. Yeah. And I also have a letter from the former landlord, Randy Blossom, that I'd like to submit to. If you want to enter that. Yes, I do own it now.
Dr. Hutton, do you know for the Thompson and Hogue sign or the other ones that are, I think the Concord Antique sign, I remember we had approved that, but is there any zone that allows by right painted on sign to the
Nowhere
building?
in the city. So the issue with the Thompson Hoag, I think that's a mural, not a sign, because it's not advertising a current business in the building. And murals don't count as signs.
Someone needs permission for them or not necessarily?
You don't need permission for them because they're art.
What about the one at
So
Nichols?
if it's advertising something that's in the building, it's a sign.
Oh.
If it's just artwork or a historical reference, it's not considered a sign, so it doesn't need a permit.
So if he put record shop on his building and the record shop puts barber shop on theirs, then it's technically allowed.
Essentially, but
So if he moves out, it's legal.
if he moves out and a toy store moves in, we are good to go.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Please come forward. Swear to tell the truth and nothing but.
Yes, I do.
May we have your name, please?
Yep, my name is Aaron Frack Monroe. Good evening, zoning board members. Thank you. I am a resident here in Ward 5, lived in Concord since 2000, and have known Josh through his tonsorial services for probably about the same amount of time. And I'm here to testify for the variances that he has been requesting. Just reiterating what Josh has said, Lucky's Barbershop has been a real asset, I think, to the neighborhood, providing our classic barber and shave services to people from around the region, hosting block parties and fundraisers for the SPCA, and been welcoming to all members of the community. The painted sign does enhance the character of the building with a nod to sort of that mid-1800s past where these signs were more frequent. The sign and the other changes to the facade of the building, the lights and some of that trim they did have improved and enhanced the aesthetic of the building, particularly as it is near downtown Concord and on the corridor leading into the city. And the sign also improves wayfinding for the shop, improving traffic and pedestrian safety. So finally, substantial justice would be served allowing that variance. Lucky's Barbershop would continue to have a sign that's well loved by, I think, a lot of members of the community and its patrons, and has been noted as an improvement, I think, over that previous sign. And as was previously mentioned, forcing the removal of the sign may cause damage to that underlying brick. With that, I would again ask that the waiver be granted, and we encourage business owners to fabricate distinctive and aesthetically pleasing period correct improvements to their storefronts.
Thank you very much.
Could you?
Yep.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal?
Your phone up here? That's okay. Is that your phone as well?
Thank you for keeping house, Ms. Perkins.
That's why I'm here.
Is there anyone who would like to be heard in opposition? Any comments from code
No,
enforcement?
nothing additional, no.
With that, we'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have a request for two variances, one for the area of a sign and the other for the fact that it is painted directly on the bricks rather than being on a removable panel. We heard testimony that the owner did this in error as far as contravening the ordinance, of which he was unaware, and that he did so because he thought it actually was consistent with other signs that he had seen around the city. I'm going to start this one with Mr. Wallner.
I like the sign. This is a classic early 1900 look. It sort of gives it a historic appeal. You've got the barbershop pole in the front. You've got the painted on sign. The hardship is obviously the main issue that we have to be persuaded on. And I guess the only hardship that I can look at is that we had testimony submitted that the brick really wouldn't tolerate some sort of a fixed sign, and thus limiting the applicant from having any kind of signage.
Thank you. Mr. Monahan?
Yeah, I think it's struggle for me to get to yes on this. You know, the sign is 350% bigger than it's supposed to be. While we heard a good case that it's an artistic sign, it's still a sign. And so with regard to the issue about the integrity of the brick and stuff, I'm not sure that I have enough information. You know, maybe the applicant comes back and says, because of the integrity of the brick, I want to paint right on the brick, but it's 25 square feet, not 87 and a half square feet. So, but I'm willing to listen to my colleagues and try to change my mind.
Ms. Victor Morgan?
I actually agree 100% with Jim. I could get to yes on the painting directly on the brick based on the letter from the mason. I can't get there on the sign, and I think it's a great sign too. I love the sign too, but I can't get there on the size. There's just no hardship.
Andrew?
It's an awesome sign. I concur. I mean, this is one of the best signs that, in my very amateur sign experience, I've seen come in front of us, but it kind of breaks my heart because I do love it. I think it adds character to that area of town, and if there's anyone in the city who has authority to approve it, I wish they would, but it's really, in terms of the hardship or variance, honestly not really close. So I just can't see approving it.
You could make the building 300 times
larger.
Pretty tight lot.
He's on the corner, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Can he count all of the frontage or just one street?
Primary, principal entrance is where we count the street.
I admit the hardship is a stretch. On the other hand, I'm confronted with the feeling that there's absolutely no gain to anyone having the sign removed and rebuilt or painted over. Although it is tough to. You could argue that the damage to the brick would be a hardship, and that given the circumstances of this particular violation, there's no reason to ask the appellant to do that. Having gotten to that point, then comes the question of the size of the sign. We've heard the purpose of the limiting of the sizes of signs is essentially aesthetic in the city, and we've heard no testimony that even though the sign is bigger than it's supposed to be, it creates an aesthetic liability. And in fact, because it is so big, it actually creates a unique character for itself. So I think I'm willing to put on very, very slippery sneakers and walk out on a wire and say that I would vote for a motion to approve, but it doesn't sound like I'm going to have the opportunity. So would anyone care to make a motion?
Before we do that, can I, there was something in here that suggested that the code enforcement is working through issues with the applicant.
So this is
We didn't
part
get
of
any
that.
update on that.
This is part of that process. We found the violation. He's been working with us to remedy it. This is the first step in that process. So whichever way you decide is what the next step is. You know what I mean?
What would be possibly those next steps?
So the next step, if it's approved, I believe is, let me just check on the size real quick. I don't remember if it has to go to ADR. Urban commercial. So it would have to go to ADR as the next step if you approve the variance. If you don't approve the variance, then we have to remedy the size of the sign in some way in terms of either painting over it back to the brick color and reducing the size, or whatever he may decide to do to remedy it. So either he goes to another board next, or he removes the sign next. So, I mean, the point in putting that in the memo was just to say he's been working with us to figure out what to do next.
Mm-hmm. And if we were going to paint directly on the brick with another sign, he'd need to come back here with a...
With a new, right, if it's gonna still be directly on the brick, he would need to come back for another variance to ask for
Unless
that in
we-
a different size.
Unless we grant the variance to allow it to be painted directly.
Right, if you separate it and allow him to paint directly on the,
It is two different variances, is it not?
yeah, they are separate, they're just in the same paragraph, so it depends on how you vote on it, sometimes you do together, sometimes you split them.
Yes, we do.
Or, I don't want to get too creative here, we could take no final action tonight, and the applicant could come back with a proposal for what because we'd probably want to come back with something more than 25 square feet, but not these 7. And that might give us a better choice.
If it were tabled, it wouldn't have to be substantively different, because it wouldn't be a new application.
Yeah. Matt has a question.
Uh,
Mark, sorry.
To his point, sorry, I don't know your name. What can you run us through what it would take to be considered a mural?
It would have to not be advertising the business.
So if he spelled Barbara wrong.
A picture of scissors.
I'm not sure, but there's this case in,
Just
there's
put
this case
not,
in Conway with something about donuts in a mountain that.
Yes, I heard about the donuts in the mountain.
I'm not sure I want to go there.
Yeah. So if he calls it a Bieber shop, it's,
Yeah, like I said before, I say my observation is it's challenging for me to get to yes, but I'm trying to find a way to get there, and I don't want the applicant put a lot of, thought into the sign and things like that. But I do worry that we have lots of sign stuff that comes here, and oftentimes people point to things that we've done.
No, your suggestion is a reasonable one. If the applicant chose to table the application, he could come back with something that wouldn't be a separate application, wouldn't be a separate application fee. He'd be able to perhaps propose something that was a little more.
Yeah, and I hate to have a negative vote when people are trying to get to yes.
Right, right.
well, we do
And
have,
certainly the code enforcement would take no action while all this was
Of course, no, if there's a pending hearing, we don't take action, that's correct.
we do have the authority to defer our decision and ask for further information.
Is that a motion?
Not from me, no.
No, is it require a motion?
Yes.
In either case, you'd still have to repaint over the sign.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there is a toll clock that starts if we do that, is there not?
It's a 45-day period, but he can waive it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any interest in putting your application on hold and coming back with a smaller sign proposal?
Yeah, sure.
I guess, well, thank you for your consideration. The style, if you notice the layout of it, also not only to like the painted sign, actually had somebody from New York City that does historic preservation of these signs come out to do this. And so upon laying it out, also the size, talking about not only what I had before, but with the dimensional, when you look at it when it rolls across, the idea that it would be improportionate if you were to, well, because two things, you would have to, you couldn't remove, I guess technically, if you tried to sandblast, I'm not sure which way to remedy removing the paint, would definitely cause damage to the brick. But also the diminishing the size would it wasn't, like I said, so much about the advertised part, is when you look at like the Thompson and Hogue, how it's laid out dimensionally, it was a very specific style and sign to how they did it. So I think that it would look, I don't know the right word, but I don't think it would look as proportionate or as relevant or as nice or as if it was small, because it would kind of get lost. And if you notice, like the front sort of door of the business is not centered to the building, so that was all taken into account. So it would look more offset, and I think it would look less appealing, I guess, if you were to make it smaller. And like I said, you would have to, well, I don't think you'd be able to sandblast or anything to the brick just because of the age. And then
Okay.
also,
Okay.
Thank you.
sorry, I'm not
Take a vote
sure.
on your
Yeah,
application.
thank you.
Where were we? We have two options or three options. We could vote, we could separate the two variances and vote on each one of them. We could table the case and request that the appellant come back with more information. He's made, I think, a fairly clear statement that he'd prefer not to change the design of the sign. That's really not the direction he'd be headed in. I can tell you that I'm not quite sure how you go about removing a sign like this. I think they'd have to cover it.
Yeah.
Because you just do not sandblast exterior brick if you want it to stay there. So that's just not going to happen. So that's where we stand. We have those three options. The board members are free to make a motion on any of the three, and we can go from there.
I will start by making a motion to deny the size variance on the basis that I do not believe there's any hardship that arises from the property that necessitates a size this big. I think the other criteria are probably met, but not the hardship.
Is there a second?
I'm going to test your parliamentary skills here, Chris, and if I make a motion to table awaiting further information,
What further information?
maybe the applicant will think harder about what the outcome might be.
I mean, I'd be in favor of tabling it, but
If Ms. Spector Morgan withdraws the
I'll
motion,
withdraw the motion.
then yes, you could make an alternate motion.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to table or defer. Actually, I think it's the same effect, right? To
Yeah, I forget what the technical term for it is, but I think everybody understands what we're talking about.
notes here.
I get it. I know what you
Is it a
mean.
motion to table or a motion to defer action?
Deb can just make
To
something up.
continue.
Yeah, to continue.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to continue to the February meeting.
All right, is there a second? I'm not hearing a second. The motion fails for lack of a second. Would anyone care to make any other motion with respect to the variances?
I will move to deny the size variance on the basis that I do not believe there's any hardship that arises from the property.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. The vote is 3-2. The size variance is denied. Let's move on then to the painting of the sign directly on the brick. Do I hear a motion on that?
I will move to approve that variance. I think there is a hardship based on the testimony or the letter we received from the mason that a traditional sign cannot be supported by this brick facade. I do not believe it will diminish surrounding property values or change the character of the neighborhood. And I don't believe there's any justice to requiring him to remove the sign directly from the brick.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The vote is unanimous. The variance is granted. And that brings us to case 0133-2023, 270 Loudon Road, GWP Gateway Performance Districts, Onyx Steeplegate Concord LLC owners, and the redevelopment of the Steeplegate Mall property into a mixed-use development. For this multi-lot project, the applicant requests the following variances. 2841H, Table of Dimensional Regulations, maximum height, to allow a maximum height of 59 feet 8 inches where 45 feet is allowed. Table of Principal and Accessory Uses, to allow a tire center where prohibited in a GWP. Table of Dimensional Regulations, minimum lot frontage, to allow frontage to be calculated based on the combination of frontages on a corner lot rather than the calculation along one street as required. Table of Dimensional Regulations, maximum lot coverage, to allow 91% coverage where 85% is allowed. Table of off-street parking requirements, to allow 1,833 parking spaces where 3,298 are required. And driveway widths, to allow a 30-foot driveway width where 28 feet is the maximum. Illumination of parking areas, to allow light posts at 36 foot 6 inches in height where 25 feet is the maximum. Design standards for loading spaces, to allow 12 feet wide loading spaces where 14 feet is the minimum. And finally, screening of refuse containers, to not screen trash compactors where screening around 3 sides is required. Gentlemen, you swear to tell the truth and nothing but?
I do.
Did you find the sign-up sheet there?
I will.
Okay. And what I'm going to, everyone's back? Yes, okay. Please identify yourselves for the record and proceed.
Thank you. Tracy, if you could put up the PDF entitled ZBA presentation slides, we'll start with that one. My name's Ari Pollack. I'm an attorney at the Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell firm here in Concord. I'm here on behalf of Onyx Partners Limited, which is the owner of the site, and the developer and applicant Onyx Steeplegate Concord LLC. To my right is Doug Richardson, the executive vice president for Onyx, and to his right is Wayne Morrill of Jones and Beach Engineering. Behind me, we've got Robert Del Salvo of Embark Design, our project architect, and also in the gallery we've got representatives from Costco Wholesale, one of the users interested in the property, developing a store in the property, and specifically we have Mark Marchesano, Costco's Director of Development, with us tonight as well. I'll be doing the primary presentation, but I mention these individuals because if I get something wrong, they're going to be quick to correct me.
Very good. Thank you.
If you live in Concord, I know you all do, and you remember the Steeplegate Mall's heyday, and you've lived through what has occurred in the interim and what's there today versus what was there then, this opportunity for redevelopment should be very exciting. It's exciting to us, to other boards we've been in front of in Concord. I know there's a legal test to compare all of our requests to, but nonetheless, the whole redevelopment opportunity is welcome for this sore spot. Onyx is proposing a complete redevelopment of both the Regal Cinema property, which they've also purchased, and the former Steeplegate Mall property, and it's taken together really a generational opportunity to make improvements. The mixed-use proposal includes 3 multifamily residential apartment buildings and a combination of 6 new and existing non-residential buildings, which will have the effect of preserving a fitness use, preserving an indoor commercial recreation facility, trampoline park, and preserving the J.C. Penney box as part of the existing structure, but would be preserved, and it is on the screen. Tonight's variances, just to be clear, relate to the Steeplegate Mall parcel. I don't know if the pointer is around here.
Yeah, I got one.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. So yes, there are a lot of variances. They all relate to what is tax map lot 40.
Green button.
Super, thank you. Green, there's green. So it's this outline here. And just to be clear, this here is the Regal Cinema property. It is part of the redevelopment proposal, but it is not the subject of tonight's variances. We believe we can redevelop the Regal Cinema site without applying for variances. We need the variances we've applied for tonight for this portion of the redevelopment, and we believe we are one-stop shopping. In other words, if we were to receive the variances that we've asked for in this evening's application, we don't anticipate having to come back to the zoning board for additional zoning relief.
All right, just quick, why, maybe it's later, but why this map is up, can you point to where the tire center is going to be?
I can't because the tire center will be in a new building, but I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like, and there it is right there. So this is the proposed Costco, and the tire center will be entirely within this building. And I'm going to show you an elevation.
Is that part of Costco then?
It is. Okay. It is an accessory use within their building that they operate. I'm sorry? Correct. We'll get into the details of the tire center, but it really would be no different than the tire center that was part of the prior Sears that operated there in the past. It hasn't been operating for several years. Again, some preliminaries. The redevelopment site is going to be consolidated and re-subdivided, so the Applebee's restaurant on this corner and the Bank of New Hampshire facility on this corner, they are not part of the redevelopment. So they're going to be spun off onto separate lots. We do have some relief directed at those two to create an individual parcel versus what they are now, which is a land unit of a condominium. Land condominiums create problems, and this is a result of that structure. They have separate ownership, they'll be separate, and they're not participating in the redevelopment. They'll stay essentially as they are today, which is fully functional and doing very nicely. The entirety of the redevelopment site is within the city's Gateway Performance District. As you know, the Performance District is intended to facilitate mixed-use development. It allows multifamily apartment-style dwellings as a permitted use, and it offers the flexibility to combine uses on single parcels. The redevelopment site will be bisected by two proposed new roads. Obviously, we have Loudon Road here. We have Route 106 Estate Highway here. We have existing DeMonte Drive that bisects those two, connects those two public streets. And then there is a public road proposed at the easterly or high side, if you will, and a cross connector at the from the north to south, again connecting additional roads. Those are proposed to be public streets, and they are informing a lot of the choices that we make about where the subdivision lines are falling. The layout of these streets is all part of a comprehensive development plan that is submitted to the planning board and pending with the planning board. What the planning board saw was a very preliminary set of conceptual ideas, and things were tabled in order to develop things like a traffic study, coming to the zoning board, things that would be necessary to finish that submission. It's pending. Tonight we're here asking for the variances that were read by the chairman and are listed in the agenda. I won't relist them now because we'll be going through each item, but the list is unchanged. And again, they all relate to this Steeplegate site. And as I mentioned before, it's worth repeating, with these variances, if they were to be granted and as they've been applied for, we don't think we'll need to be back. Our next stop would be our next and frankly final stop would be the planning board and its various contributing boards. We'd be one and done and back to the planning board, we hope. First up on the list is the relief for maximum building height. And if we can go right there, thank you very much. Applicant is proposing 3 multifamily apartment buildings on the proposed lots 40-2 and 40-3. Those are to be subdivided from what is now one land unit or lot. R1 is actually here, and that is proposed as a 5-story building. The ordinance talks about feet, not stories. The proposed height of R1 is 58 feet.
Is that R2?
Whichever one. Oh, sorry. I can't see it from here, but I got older since the last time I was here.
The middle one says
Yep. Okay. Keep me honest. See what I mean? I need help. R2, where's that one here? Okay, see. Why they're not in order, I don't know. I asked that question and I got this. But I'm sure there's a very good reason. Is a 4 and 5-story building. The front here is 4, but the maximum height is proposed to be 59 feet 8 inches. And R3 in the back is a 4-story building, and that one is proposed to be 48 feet. The ordinance allows a maximum building height of 45 feet in the Gateway Performance District. And so each of the 3 buildings would require additional height to be constructed as proposed, but they each require a different height. And so as far as our request to the board, it could either be one variance allowing up to 59 feet 8 inches for each of the 3 buildings, or you could take each one separately, and it would be R1 58, R2 59 8, R3 48, and I can go over those again as needed. In terms of the statutory variance test, the hardship, the subject property it's part of an assemblage of tracts that comprise a single redevelopment site with a common theme of development. That's why we're an applicant for a CDP. And large development opportunities in today's world, and in particular in a municipality like Concord, in particular, require redevelopment of existing uses. Even the demolition alone of the existing condition, if we went back a few slides, would be more than the budget for some projects in their entirety. This place, for those of you who recall what it is and looks like, it is a fortress that will require significant demolition. The proposed multifamily building locations, I guess back to the other slide, no thank you, are not in close proximity to other residential uses on surrounding properties, and they can be placed within lot setbacks and other buffering requirements. In other words, we haven't asked for variances for side setbacks or front setbacks or any of the other buffers that might apply to multifamily projects in other districts. The proposed layout achieves the developer's desired unit count, but it also allows for a placement of a village atmosphere with open space and public amenities, and we'll get into some of that. And all of it is, of course, subject to site plan review and approval. But putting the buildings in this configuration and making them taller gives us the flexibility to have fewer but taller buildings and not have more shorter buildings, which we would be allowed to do, but it would chew up space that we'd rather use for things like walkable streets and courtyards and a throughway that actually goes underneath this building for a pedestrian and vehicular connection. And then this one here, and try not to snicker because we really think we can pull this off, but this water body here is actually mostly owned by the city. It's a public piece of submerged land, but there is a portion here, if I trace this line, that is waterfront that's on private property, and we're proposing a very nice park there with some active walkways and gathering spaces, and it would be open to the public. I say this, tongue-in-cheek, because I know that what's there now is the opposite of picturesque, but I do think that it could be pulled off, and we did present this to the Conservation Commission, and they were favorably impressed with some ability to activate what is now unused, inactive, just exists. Today, it's really a low area gathering space for untreated runoff and drainage from the expansive parking lot. So, you just, as a practical matter, you just can't do and fit everything, and zoning relief on the height gives us the ability to do a lot of these other things. In terms of other pieces of the variance for building height is reasonable, considering that the performance district allows multifamily dwellings as part of a mixture of uses, and that the 4-story apartment structure probably could be accomplished without zoning relief in the 45 feet. It's that 5th floor that's really pushing us into the 50s for these buildings. And it really doesn't change the effect of the development on abutting property owners, frankly, or anybody else. The zoning allows consolidation into 3 buildings without, without interfering with the amenity concepts or the retail concepts that in many ways are also anchoring this site. Nowadays, we've got one project after another where it's the residential pieces that anchor the pro forma, and that is not the case here. This is a true mixed-use project with true anchoring on and support on both sides of the ledger. And I think that is a distinguishing feature. The public interest for all of these variances is frankly the same, that redeveloping an underperforming property greatly outweighs concern about adding some number of feet or a story to buildings. And there's substantial community interest in, for this variance, in developing modern, safe, affordable, use the word, rental housing, especially in a location like this in the city where it is so proximate to services that would be developed both on the property, already surround the property, and the public transportation and arterial opportunities that are right on the road already. They require nothing more than perhaps a relocation of existing stops. They're already there and they're already traveled. The spirit and intent of the ordinance and substantial justice, the height variance would be consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance, which I think is to encourage mixed-use development in these districts, and the zoning relief facilitates an otherwise conforming and desirable project in a recognized performance zone, with the exception of the tire center as an accessory use inside a building. There aren't any other use-related pieces of relief that we're looking for. Everything fits nicely, I would argue, in harmony. And as we get into parking and other things, you'll see that somebody could live there, work there, eat there, and play there if they want to come to the waterfront or the trampoline park or the fitness center. Surrounding property values, there's no evidence to suggest on a property like this that's surrounded by public and arterial roadways that an extra story on a building is going to devalue anything that surrounds it. And if anything, the redevelopment of a long, neglected, tired, I mean, you put your adjectives in there, but blighted Steeplegate Mall, it's only going to enhance the market value of what surrounds it. I'm going to move through our variance requests in the interests of time, but stop me anytime or at the end. As I mentioned, we're looking to create a retail lot that will house the J.C. Penney, which exists. Oh, sorry, if you could go back to where you are.
Oh,
one more?
This one?
Right there.
Okay.
So the J.C. Penney and the Costco will be on one parcel, one created parcel. The Costco is proposing their prototypical retail layout. What does that mean? It means that they're going to have gasoline sales and a gas island and fueling area located over here, a permitted use. They're going to have their prototypical pharmacy, medical, optometry uses in the footprint of the building. They're going to have a garden center. All of what I've mentioned so far is permitted, either principal or accessory, and a tire center. And you would think that the tire center would be the easy one, but actually that's the one that requires relief. And it's really only because tire centers are not allowed as a primary or principal use in that district. They're not discussed at all as accessory. And if we could go out of this slide deck and into the tire center exhibit, you'll see that if it weren't for the fact that it says tire center right here, and you'd wonder what these garage doors are up to, you really wouldn't even know that it's there. So it's entirely self-contained. It is not going to be noxious or disruptive. There's not a big pile of tires next to the door waiting for somebody to come get them. It's self-contained, and like I said, it's accessory to the retail use of the entirety of the footprint, which is permitted. Costco operates on this sort of one-stop shopping model all over the country, and they offer these accessory services for the convenience of their customers. And, striking one accessory use when allowing others, when it can be efficiently incorporated into the building and you really would be hard-pressed to know it's there without the signage, is in and of itself a hardship. There's really no justification for saying no if it's not bothering anybody and is contained within a retail use.
Do all Costco's have a tire center? Is that like a necessary function of their?
I'm sure there's one of them out there that doesn't. That's correct, yes. There's a few out there that don't, but this is the business model, and this is one of the ingredients.
They all have them.
They all have them. What do I know? A little help from my friends. Well, so that's the importance of tires. There you go. I would have guessed there was one, but I guess I'd have been wrong. So like I said, I was about to say that the tire center is a central part of the business model, but it turns out it's critical. It's a reasonable use in the sense that, like I said, it's an accessory use that's consistent with some of the other big boxes around Concord. You see it in various places. I'm sure there's a long history of how they got where they are, and I don't know that that's terribly important tonight, but I will mention again that it was part of the Sears that was there and seemingly happily coexisted as part of their building for a long time. In fact, I think that was one of the pieces that lasted the longest when they decided to abandon ship. The public interest in redeveloping, again, the underperforming property really outweighs any concern about incorporating an accessory retail use that's otherwise completely contained. And it's consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance because it facilitates someone like Costco coming to the site, doing what they do in all the places that they do it, and being able to roll out their program. And again, having it self-contained without much distinction other than signage really means that there's no evidence to suggest that it would have any kind of negative effect on surrounding property values. Moving on to lot frontage, this one's a little bit of a different animal. And if we can go a couple more slides, I think there's one that might show it better. Keep going. Is that it? All right. Well, we'll have to find it.
Might be a standalone.
I think it's sheet 5 in that deck. But anyway, we'll get there. There it is. So I don't know how much you can zoom here, but this is, again, the Bank of New Hampshire existing facility. And that lot would be proposed at 0.68 acres. It'd be owned in fee by the bank or its landlord, and would be separate from the mixed-use development. That lot to be created as a new lot would require 300 feet of road frontage. It has 300 feet, but it has it from this point around the corner to this point. And the ordinance says you have to have continuous 300 feet on one road. I don't know why it says that. It doesn't make any sense. But what we've got is continuous 300 feet on two roads. This road up here will be a public street if all goes to plan. And so what we're asking for is a variance to count our frontage from this point around the corner to this point. And if you wanted to condition that variance on this road being built and being built public, we would accept that because we understand that that's an underlying piece of the relief we're requesting, that it be 300 feet on public road, or in this case, to public road. Again, the hardship is that this already exists. Maybe it exists only because it was a land condo, and you remember what I said about that. But it exists, it's in its current condition, it's entirely functional the way it is, and it will soon be an independent parcel if you look favorably upon two roads instead of one. It's really a unique circumstance of it being a corner lot, and while I couldn't think of a particular example, I probably would venture that it's come up before.
Is that the configuration of the existing land condominium unit?
That's correct.
Okay.
I also think it's a reasonable use, really, because it's observing the existing condition, and it's really just playing with the language of the ordinance that it happens to say one street.
Sure, I'm following this, but that corner lot where the bank is now is not part of the redevelopment? Is that what you're
It is not. It's going to be spun off as a separate lot and stay the way it is. Am I not explaining that clearly? I mean, is there another question?
No, keep going.
Okay.
Which is
I feel like
also
I'm
true.
confusing you more than I should be, so I'm sorry if I'm doing something wrong or.
Which is also true for the Applebee's.
It is, but in that case, it has the 300 feet.
Oh, on either one of those corners, it has 300 feet.
At least I think that's true. Yes, it is. See, help from my
I promise
friends.
you wouldn't come back. It better be true.
Well, this is why I made sure that I knew what I was talking about.
Promised he's never coming back in this room.
Well, on other applications maybe, or properties. I
You're
guess.
always welcome here, Mr. Pollak.
Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure. Public interest, again, it's the same thing. It's really just that, recognizing 2 streets of frontage instead of 1 really outweighs the idea that we're going to strictly apply this definition. And the spirit and intent of the ordinance, I think, would respect the fact that this lot exists, functions properly, and there's nobody being financially harmed in terms of property value by allowing this condition to be memorialized as a standalone lot versus a land unit. On to minimum lot coverage. We have a coverage exhibit in a separate PDF. If you could go there, I think it's 4.0 perhaps. That's it. So the lot coverage. Sorry. Who is that? The lot coverage variance relates to the J.C. Penney and Costco. So here is the existing condition. This is the mall. This is the lot. This is the proposed, right? This is the lot. This is the gas. This is the J.C. Penney. This is the Costco. This is the parking. The lot will contain 18.27 acres when created or subdivided. As I mentioned in the prior slides, it's really informed by the road layout. First, you've got 2 existing streets, and then you've got the 2 that are proposed, and it creates the corners for this opportunity. The current shape that is shown here, it's not a lot of its own today, but the current land area, 94% impervious. The applicant is seeking a variance to reduce the coverage, but still exceed the maximum of 85% to 91. So we're making things better, but we're not getting to compliance. If you take the properties as a whole, if you go to Exhibit 4.1, I think it is in the deck, and I might have to jockey back and forth, but if you take the redevelopment of the mall as a whole, exclude the cinema property, we're not talking about that tonight, take the redevelopment of the mall as a whole, and you compile your impervious coverage limits, you actually get an existing coverage of approximately 80%, which is this 79-something number here. You can get the whole property down to 74-something. So we're able to make a change from compliant to even better if you take the property as a whole. But if you focused only on the Costco and J.C. Penney lot, you're taking what is essentially a 94% and making it a 91%. So if it helps you to digest that relief, the whole place, again, subject of a comprehensive development plan, is compliant, but there is a central piece of it that is the big box that is requiring coverage relief for the lot we're seeking to create. Again, we are inheriting a situation that is non-conforming, and we're doing our best to bring it forward. We're bringing forward the whole development site. We're also bringing forward the Costco, even if a variance is still necessary or requested. And it's a unique circumstance of the heavily developed condition, and that it's proposed to be bisected by a proposed road system. So if we go back to the exhibit, the other coverage exhibit, thank you. You might say, well, why don't you just move the roads this way or that way and, put some green space where the road used to be? Well, there are reasons why these roads connect where they are. In the first instances, there are existing driveways onto the current public streets that we're trying to respect. And in other places, we're trying to deal with site distance and curvature and grade, and it's not so easy to just put the road wherever you want it. Our engineers are deliberate with those issues. The reasonable use here is that it allows a permitted use to remain. Again, that's the J.C. Penney. A new use to come in while still bettering the conformity, albeit non-conforming to non-conforming, but we're getting there. We're making it better. And the public interest supports a redevelopment, especially when you consider that the entirety of the development site is moving from conforming to even more conforming at that mid-70% number. Substantial justice, spirit of the intent. We're making things better, and we're pursuing permitted uses in a mixed-use fashion. And I don't think there's any evidence to suggest a diminution in property value as a result of a coverage variance from 85% to 91%, especially when you consider what's there now and how impervious that surface is. Moving on to off-street parking. There's a exhibit.
Separate.
Yep. If you want to zoom in on the, table. Well, you could use that one, but maybe zoom in on the table on the side. It's hard enough to read, even on your own screen, but there's nuance here. The nuance, yes, if you were to take each individual use and apply the parking table in the ordinance, you would add up to a very large number of spaces required at the bottom of the page, and you would see that we're proposing far less. The nuance, I don't remember where maybe it's there, but the nuance is, what's interesting to me about this is the ordinance already allows for alternate parking arrangements that are presided over by the planning board. The planning board gets to receive and consider parking information that's specific to uses, mixed-use developments, shared parking, complementary parking, time of day use patterns, capture rates and shared trips, one-stop shopping, people who live there and walk versus drive and park. The planning board's allowed to consider all of those things, but interestingly enough, it has this awkward language about providing sufficient area to build all of the parking, even if you're excused from building all of it now. It doesn't make any sense. If you're excused from building it, don't build it. And if the planning board is satisfied that you can support these uses with the information that you brought in, it really is no different than any other piece of relief that you're asking for from the planning board. These are typically conditional use permits, and they're part of, frankly, any large redevelopment opportunity. And so we're not so much asking that you say, okay, you can do 80 spaces where 100 is required. We're asking that you provide a variance from the requirement that the planning board require this set aside or handcuff them with this set aside and give them the discretion to figure out how much parking is enough parking based upon the uses. And keep in mind, the uses are, in the one instance, residential, where 2 spaces are required per unit. That's a lot for residential, or for rental parking, especially with the amount of public infrastructure and transportation surrounding this property. And again, I'm not asking you to dig into the details, but just to understand it at a conceptual level, Costco thinks they can park significantly less than what the ordinance requires for a big box retailer. And that's why you have so many large unused parking lots around town. And so we're already asking for a coverage variance to go to 91%. If we put all the parking that was required over there, you'd be at 110%. Again, we're trying to balance conflicting provisions and balance the idea of how much parking is really needed for each use, and giving the planning board the unfettered discretion to review those issues when and if we get there, or get back there.
Do you happen to know what, I know the calculation would have been different, but when the mall was operating as a mall, did they have a variance for parking?
I don't know the answer to that. My suspicion is that they provided every piece of parking that they physically could, because there is almost no green space outside of the area surrounding that pond.
And there's that whole overflow area that they're building residential in, that's all just.
That's unused parking. It's been snow storage in my lifetime.
I have a question. On residential unit number 1, you're saying that you only need 0.95 parking spaces per unit?
I think that's what we're providing, not what's required.
Well, it's required 2, but 2 per unit, but you've got here is 0.95.
I guess I'm looking to Wayne for this, but my understanding is that that's what we're proposing, not what would be required.
What's the bedroom count in residential 1?
I don't know that we have bedroom counts. We have unit counts at this point.
Which is 310, right?
I'm sorry. Okay, we can offer that they're 1 and 2 bedroom units, but the parking requirement is per unit.
Can you elaborate on underutilization of parking at other Costco locations?
I can, the folks behind me can, but that's exactly what we'd like to have the discussion with the planning board about. So the answer is yes, we're going to need to do that at some point, but because the ordinance already talks about alternative parking arrangements and giving the planning board jurisdiction over those issues, we're going to have that conversation there, I think. Again, I think the hardship here is it's trying to digest 2 competing portions of an ordinance, knowing that it's pushing us toward parking we don't need. And I won't bore you with this for more than 2 seconds, but I think that the next version of the zoning ordinance will do a better job of handling these things, but you all know it hasn't been adopted by anybody. So I won't spend any more time on that except to say hope is on the way. Until then, the zoning board is open for business.
Can I stick on the parking issues for a minute, unless are you done?
No,
Yeah.
please.
So, I'm sorry, I'm doing the rough math myself based upon the parking calculations in this document.
Yeah.
It looks like you're, like 1,600 spots short on the residential piece, breaking apart all of the
On the
retail.
residential, that doesn't sound right to
Well,
me.
I'm looking at,
Yeah, let me figure it out too.
Why don't you just explain it, Wayne, if you've got the numbers? Yeah, see.
You want me to zoom in on the table
Yeah,
a
if
little
you
more?
go down a little bit and then zoom in just like halfway down, you keep going down.
I think we went too far. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So, right,
That's for residential 3.
Yep. So it's right up.
I'm not sure how we're
There you
jumping around, but
Retail.
retail,
Residential 3 was less than 100 spaces short from what I could see.
there it is.
There it is.
Residential 2, it's 135.
So we're basically proposing 1 space per unit as it shakes out. But, again, and so those numbers, I'm not sure where you took them from or how you could even read that. Good work. But,
I'm working off of this parking calculation here.
Yep, that's it.
And what you show beginning on map 611Z, lots 40 to 42. On R1, you're short 321 spots, going down to big pieces. Maybe I'm not getting the totals correctly, but do you, perhaps I'm wrong, you must know how many you're short on the residential side.
It's not a matter of short. What we've done is projects of this type, especially mixed use, the term non-simultaneous occupancy comes into play. So the trampoline park, the fitness center, the retail stores will not be open at night when the residential is required. So there is an overlap of parking that's provided.
So,
but the residential is, you have I don't know how heavily traffic is, but there's a road separating most of the retail and the residential. So you're thinking they're going to park there and then walk across that road?
no,
No, it's all self-contained within that eastern side of the site. There's circulation on that site, but you're not crossing the road that lines up with vertically. Everything is self-contained on the right side.
So the parking required on what is to be lot 40-2, which is actually 2 residential buildings, the health club, the trampoline park, and some small retail multi-tenant, is 1,400 required, 700 provided, rough numbers. And then if you took up R3, which is just a residential, it's 240 required, 157 provided. That's so, and in each of the residential buildings, we've got a space ratio of 0.9 spaces per unit, 1.2 spaces per unit, and 1.3, 3 spaces per unit. So we're going to be asking the planning board to recognize that 2 spaces per unit is too heavy. We're also going to be asking them to recognize that there are some folks who park at the apartments and live at the apartments who then walk to some of the other services, like the gym or the trampoline park.
Dr. Hutton had.
Yeah, I just want to offer clarification while you're trying to do the calculations on your own.
And I
When
think
they
it's
did that parking
542
table,
for what it's worth.
What?
I think they're short 542 for the residential.
Okay.
when they did the parking calculations, they did the trampoline park as team play, and it's actually indoor recreation. So that parking table isn't going to line up with the variance request, because the variance request was adjusted for the proper classification. So if you're trying to do the math, they're not going to match.
So that's true, but keep in mind that our ask is to uncuff the planning board so that they can examine the proposed uses with the proposed parking and the synergies of the uses, and not have to require that every single space is planned and set on a plan so that it could be built someday with some sort of forward-looking condition about if it's a problem, when it's a problem, who decides if it's a problem, where is it built, how is it built, who pays for it. All of those things make no sense to me.
So that's a pretty unique request, but for the zoning board to pass it along to the planning board. Are you suggesting that that's because this is a very unique piece of property with multiple uses?
I am suggesting that it is unique in the sense of the uses that are shared here and the amount of parking that the ordinance would otherwise require. But a shared parking arrangement or an alternative parking arrangement is already part of the ordinance and already part of the purview of the planning board. We're just asking that you take away what would require them to have us show every space that is required someplace on this property, and give them the ability to review what they'd be doing anyway and decide whether or not we are adequately parked for the uses we're proposing.
And I'm not disagreeing with the approach.
Understood.
Sorry, disagreeing with the approach. I'm just saying it's unique. I can't remember an applicant coming before us here and parking and saying, why don't you guys stay out of it and leave it to the planning board?
Alternative parking arrangements don't make sense in a lot of circumstances, because you can just go in and say, my use requires 20 spaces and I'm providing 15 and I want a variance for 5 less. in this case, you do have a lot of other considerations of it being a multi-use project. But those, I don't want to overstate that, though, because there are other multi-use projects. There are other comprehensive development plan projects around Concord, built and proposed. And they've all dealt with parking issues, and they've all dealt with them in front of the planning board. And so what I'm suggesting is let them do their typical analysis, but without this requirement that some forward-looking condition be observed. Just if they decide to impose it, okay, we're stuck with it.
Do you have enough room on these parcels to do that?
Not the amount of spaces we would require, no.
I didn't think so. So without some relief, this design simply doesn't work.
This design would not work.
Right, okay.
It kind of strikes me that, going back to what you earlier said about the height, you said, well, we could do the same number of units and meet the height requirement, just having more, wider or more buildings, but then that would mean less parking, right? So it's kind of a trade-off.
100%. Everything affects something else. Parking affects coverage, height affects layout and footprint, everything affects everything else.
Are you doing any garages underneath at the buildings?
No.
Right. So what Doug is saying that is true, that a lot of times you have a mixed-use project that is, the uses are more segregated than what we're proposing. We've got mixed-use buildings that actually have mixed uses in the building and are connected to the building. And that also is a little bit of a unique factor when you're figuring out shared parking arrangements. Somebody that lives in I've said this before, but I'll say it again, somebody that lives in the apartment building who goes to the gym and then walks over to Costco has not moved their car. But they're 3 trips under an ITE standard.
So, trying to better fully understand the item 5 here. So you're suggesting that we allow you to go from 3,298 spots to 1,833, and the planning board decides where within this whole development those 1,833 spots go?
No, I'm not asking you to determine any amount of parking. I'm asking you to let the planning board do what it already can do in terms of evaluating the sufficiency of a parking proposal, but to vary the language that says set aside areas for the full number of spaces required to serve the respective uses. That's it.
So do you have the agenda in front of you? That's what I'm looking at now. We can go back into it. But item 5 says
I know that it says that.
to allow 1,833 where 3,298 are required.
I don't.
But that's what's here, but it's not what you're asking for?
Correct. What I'm asking for is for the planning board to be allowed its discretion without that requirement to show a place to build every space.
But if we approve the variance as requested, you'd have to put at least that 1,833.
No more than 1,832. No, you're right, at least.
I have a question about so your request was for the table of off-street parking requirements, not the alternative parking arrangement standard that they all be built. So I'm looking at your request here. I'm just trying to make sure that we didn't notice something improperly now.
Well, I think it all arises out of the same article, and the description is accurate, which is we want to be able to park less. But the relief that we're seeking is to give the planning board more discretion to consider less. I mean, I don't see how, you might feel differently, but I don't know how you could approve 1,800 and something spaces based on the information we have in front of you.
I don't disagree with any of that, right? I just think what's in front of us is asking us to do that.
Well, I think that parking relief is properly notified, noticed. I just think what we're asking for is, a different portion of that part of the ordinance.
With all due respect to the applicant, it's a different section of the ordinance.
It's also not something we can do, I don't think. All we can act on is what's in front of us.
Right, that's what I'm saying. What he's asking for isn't what was noticed.
Yeah, and plus, I'm not sure we have the power to do that.
Yeah, you do, but it's not what was noticed.
We do have the power to do that. And how does that, where is that?
Because it's section, it would actually be a variance from 28.711B,
C1.
which is, right, but
11's
B is the construction of fewer spaces and C1 is the sufficient area, so it would be both.
Right, so we're not looking for a variance from B. We think the planning board could enable us to build fewer spaces. We're asking for relief from C, which is to designate where you'd build them if you needed them someday.
Okay, I think we're probably going to have to set aside that issue, because it's not the agenda, it's not the way it's noticed.
Right, it's not the way it was requested.
If it was requested according to how you're thinking it is now being asked, how would that be phrased?
It would just, it would change the article number and it would change the request to not construct the remainder of the spaces as opposed to not provide.
Or not have to
So,
provide the
so
space
the,
for.
by variancing the table of off-street parking requirements, it's to not provide at all, which is how it was requested in the applicant's documentation. What he's saying now is, we're going to provide them and not construct them ever. Is that?
Because there's no place to construct them.
No,
Because there's no place to construct them, right. So they're gonna ask for an alternative, a CUP for an
We're not
alternative
gonna-
parking arrangement.
We're not going to provide them. We're going to ask for permission not to provide them and not show where they would be if we were required to provide them.
Right, but that, again, that's under the alternative parking arrangement section, not the table of parking regulations.
Okay. Well, maybe we need to defer that one or just withdraw it.
It sounds like there's some confusion on it, and rather than have us blunder into it,
Understood.
I suspect that's what the board will want to do. But why don't you proceed, and we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we've got
Let
a
me just say,
couple
I'm
of,
not trying to be difficult or create problems here. I'm just trying to deal with the fact that we don't want to, you want to be unshackled from the planning board, but if we took the action, you would be shackled and limited to the 18 whatever. So.
okay, I understand your concern, and I didn't take it as being difficult at all. I took it as trying to figure out what we asked for. So let's leave parking aside for a minute and go to the rest of these, which are specific to the Costco lot. The next one is driveway widths. There is an exhibit 6.1 for this. Thank you. For some reason, the ordinance states that driveway widths have to be a maximum of 28 feet. We'd like to do 30 feet. And our reason is very simple. Costco operates hundreds of these properties around the country. And in their experience, a 30-foot width for the arterial driveway areas, which is what you see here in blue, works better than something narrower. I think there are a few reasons why that's the case. These are areas where you would have two-way traffic. These are areas where you would have customers crossing with heavily loaded carts. And if you go to 6.2, we put together a little bit of a graphic that shows that the buying club carts are larger than typical carts. And so if we're only asking for 2 feet, the cart's a foot longer. I realize this is all very silly, but the ordinance started it when it said 28 feet. What we're really just trying to do here is, again, balance all of the different things that come into play when you plan a site. A wider street is more coverage. We don't think we need more than 30 feet, but we need enough to get past each other with the types of things that customers are emerging from these stores in their carts. Sometimes one cart's not enough. I know what I buy when I'm at these various places, and I wouldn't mind an extra few feet when I'm coming down the aisle or somebody's driving in the opposite direction. Again, it's public interest, it's safety, it's reasonable, it's the experience of Costco, and I don't see what public interest is preserved by saying you can't have something more than 28 feet. To me, in many communities, this would be something of a site plan regulation that the board could waive for good cause.
Have you done A calculation of what the extra 2 feet in width adds to the coverage?
I have not. And likewise, there's no evidence to suggest that marginally wider driveways would have any impact on surrounding property values. Again, we're going to need a drainage system that accomplishes collection and treatment from all impervious surfaces. I'll try to move through the rest of this. I know I've taken too long. The next exhibit is 7.1. Again, this is driven by the language in the ordinance. Article 2877J says you can't have a light post that's higher than 25 feet. We'd like light posts that are 36 feet 6 inches. The ones that are there today are more than that. But we realize we're a change in use and a redevelopment, and we're stuck with 25 feet unless we get a variance. The variance to allow taller posts and fewer light poles in general betters the situation with fewer obstructions in the drive aisles and the parking. And you might ask, how much better? Well, on the left side, using the 25-foot poles in order to get safe and adequate light coverage in the parking areas, you would need 89 poles. In the 36-foot pole scenario, only 40. So less than half of the required poles. And if you go, please, Tracy, to 7.2, there are a series of slides here that show the 36-foot poles at a recently constructed Costco in Maine. And you can see on the first slide, it's very well covered and lit with no light spillage or spillover. So the point being that the poles work very effectively and are not really different in appearance. Again, this is Costco's model. Their experience is that a lesser number of...
Do you mind if I interrupt?
Not at all, please. Sit right here.
Swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
Absolutely.
May we have your name, please?
My name is Mark Marchesano. I'm Director of Development for Costco Wholesale. All I wanted to do was give a little bit of an explanation of how Costco operates, because it'll explain items related to the 30-foot drive aisle portions around the building and the main arterials, as well as the lighting. So we're a large facility. We do have access with semi-trucks onto our parcel. And so the 30-foot drive aisles, is it possible to go back to that exhibit, the one with the, that one? So the way that we operate is we want to make sure that around the building and the main access points into it have sufficient width, not only to be safe for two-way traffic as well as members pushing carts, but also for any potential semi-trucks that are coming in, or the fire truck that might be coming in, so they've got to be able to access all the way around. And so that's where that 30-foot comes from. It really is a safety factor. You know, it's, if you look at our drive aisles that go between the parking lots, we're in the 24-foot range. So it's an offset. It's really just specifically meant for those access points where there's potential for a semi-truck or a fire truck to access the site, that could then also access that with our members utilizing it. We are a single point of entry for our members, which is our corner and our main entrance. We're very particular in making sure that we want to make sure there's always space there, because sometimes we have members that they may get a larger item and someone is going to need to pull in, and so there's space for a loading aspect to it. So depending on the situation, that's why we need to maintain the 30-foot around the building drive aisles, as well as those arterial access points. If you want to go back to the lighting.
That one or the lit one?
The lit one. If
That
you go,
one.
yeah, so this actually is East Lyme, Connecticut. And this is a location where we're in essentially an area that is reserved. There's a lot of residential around it, and it was it was important for us as Costco to identify that using the types of lighting that we use on our site, which are LED lights, they're controlled, we can, within a couple of feet, really control the amount of lighting that has spill off of our sort of impervious area. The several reasons why we use the larger poles is, it's several fold. One is quantity. We have literally half the amount of lights. The type of lights are they disappear. You can see by, if you go to one of the other shots, the other one is our Scarborough, which we just opened, Scarborough, Maine. They're pretty indiscriminate. By having literally half the amount of light fixtures, we have half the amount of hot spots that you see if you're looking from a lower level. But more importantly for us, the way that we operate, the taller light poles actually give a much cleaner and consistent light level foot candle across the parking lot. That's the biggest reason. So we have a much safer environment when we're lighting our facility, so that we can have the amount of people that we have coming in and out of it and pushing the carts. I just wanted to give an explanation.
Okay, you want to stay there while I do the last two?
A question, what's the current height of the light poles at the Steeplegate Mall?
40 foot.
Thank you.
Other justifications for that one are the same as the others in terms of, redevelopment and no impact on surrounding property values, especially, as you can see, I guess that was Connecticut, the first one. But that's Connecticut. The others were Maine. But on the first one there, you can see that there's really no impact to abutters. There's no spillover of light, which would be the real concern, the height of the fixture. Onto loading spaces and the loading dock. This is, 8.1. The applicant is proposing 12-foot wide loading spaces, where the ordinance actually requires 14 feet. Again, I don't know why the ordinance picks seemingly as an arbitrary number, but nonetheless it does. And we've got this image here that shows, this is also Scarborough, the loading dock for that facility. And what's interesting to point out here to me is it may be 12 feet from side to side, but the total width is more than the 48 feet of 4 times 12. So there is room to operate, there's room to maneuver in here. This works well for Costco at its locations. And if you go to the 8.2 slide, you'll see that for Concord, 6 bays are proposed, but again, it's more than the 84 feet in total width. So the provision is achieved, albeit not with the individual bays. And again, this is Costco operating hundreds of sites and knowing how their system works best. And frankly, the hardship is that it forces them into building something that they don't need. And they are achieving at least the total width for what would be compliant. And if for some reason it becomes an issue, they would have the total width set aside to create some modification, although that would be completely inconsistent with their operating experience. I'll keep moving, Mark, unless you have something to add. The last one is on refuse containers. The board probably is familiar with this requirement to show a solid fence or solid wall of a building on 3 sides of a refuse container. Not all refuse containers are created equally. Some are dumpsters and some are not. This is not. This is a trash compactor. It is accessed from inside the building through this connection here, and it does not require that somebody go outside and dump barrels. So there's nothing to open, there's nothing to spill, there's nothing to be blowing around in the wind. And what we're asking for is to not screen this trash compactor or refuse container because it is self-contained, it's not unsightly. And if anything, the screening would create a hardship of being in the way, because if you go, please, to the photograph of the compactor on a truck, that's actually how they're not lifted and dumped into a truck like a dumpster. The thing is picked up in its entirety, put onto the bed of the truck, and trucked away. So it's not opened and spilled and dropped and smells. It's just picked up and leave and new one put in.
Are these represented on the plan by the two rectangles on the east side of the Costco building by road number 2?
Yes,
Correct, yes.
that's correct.
And they're painted, we typically paint them to match the building, so that if you go back to the photo, they pretty much disappear.
And again, it's a hardship of requiring something that really doesn't work well with the way this operator functions, and the purpose and intent being to screen something unsightly. This isn't unsightly, and there's nothing to get loose and blow around, which would be the secondary purpose. The public interest is to frankly have a functioning redevelopment, and this would function well without the screening being in the way of the loading and unloading of the compactor onto the back of a truck. And I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that a self-contained unit without somebody coming and going from there throughout the day is going to have any impact on property values. And in particular, as the chairman just asked, it points in the direction of other parts of the same project. It's not toward an uninvolved abutter who could have different opinions about that subject. So that took too long. My apologies, but that's really our
It's a big project.
It is, and there's a lot of requests, and big projects have big presentations. So thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Other questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Everybody sign that?
I will. Yes, yeah, I will. Do it right now.
Is there anyone here who wishes to be heard in favor of this appeal? Please come forward. You can talk about anything you like. If it's not relevant, we'll speak right up and tell you.
Yeah, again, Aaron Frackman, a resident of Concord. I spoke at the planning board meeting about the mall redevelopment project, and I am in favor of the variance for the parking minimums, which actually I think may now be alternative parking arrangements. Throughout the country, cities are removing parking minimums to enhance the livability of their cities. These minimums, especially when mandated in high-density areas like the Heights, add to heat islands, add impervious surfaces to the detriment of drainage and groundwater quality. Additional parking spaces often increase cost to the developer, or as we've seen here, they can't even meet those minimums that are set out in the tables, at times delaying or stalling development. And I think we all want this mall to be redeveloped properly for housing and retail that will benefit citizens in our tax base. Concord also has a mandate of net zero for our energy use. Eliminating parking minimums along with improving our public transit and walkability, again, in the high-density areas like the Heights, would help meet that and improve air quality in the long term. As we've heard tonight from, I think, just about every commercial development that came up, parking minimums were in every request. So I'd request that the staff continue to look at parking minimums and maximum as part of the upcoming Concord next.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard in favor? Is there anyone who'd like to be heard in opposition? Please come forward. Good evening. Good evening.
For the record, my name is Maria Dolder. I'm an attorney.
Swear to tell the truth.
I do. I represent Silver Holding LLC, which is basically the bank property. And as it was indicated, that's not part of this development. And so I guess I'd like to start out by saying that the bank they're not opposed to the redevelopment of this mall at all, or the general plan. Quite frankly, the big concern is with the parking request that they've made to this board. So it's unclear to me at this point in time how much time to spend on it, if that's being withdrawn at this point in time, or if they are actually still going forward with this particular variance.
Mr. Pollack, are you withdrawing that part of the request or asking us to defer it?
Let me ask a clarifying question before I answer that.
Sure.
This is specific to the parking request, yes?
Yes.
Okay. While I would be interested in a straw poll of the board relating to the question of showing the ability to have a full build-out, I do understand the concern that has been raised about whether that request has been properly noticed. And so I think at this point, we would withdraw that request or ask that it be continued so that we could clarify what we are asking for. So we do not wish to have a ruling on the substance of that this evening.
Very good. Is the board all comfortable with that?
Oh, I'm not prepared to make any decisions tonight, so I'm
Yeah,
very comfortable with that.
I do think it would be helpful to the applicant if we
I'd
deliberated
like
a
to
little
have
bit.
all these and think about it.
Yes, well, we can certainly talk about it. We can talk about it till the cows come wherever they're going to go. Thank you, Mr. Pollack.
Should we hear, how long do you have, because you're here now, and I'm talking Attorney
For me?
Boulder.
So, I mean, all of my points go to the extreme reduction in parking on the site. That's really their concern. So if that has been withdrawn and the board is not considering parking tonight, my client doesn't really have any other issues. The only issues that they had were basically like density and how many commercial uses they're putting on this drives some of their requirements to ask for less parking than they need. And I think most of it was already brought up by the board about, the residential units, how little parking they will have, and we all know that most people may have 2 cars, and so if that's the case, how does that all play out on the property, and how would that impact my client's property with, obviously, residents maybe parking at the bank instead if they can't find a spot that's close to where they're living. So I think all of my comments tonight were really focused on that. If that's withdrawn from this board, then we would address them if another variance request comes forward.
As far as the board's procedure goes, in this case, normally when we close the public testimony portion of the hearing, that's it. We don't take any more testimony. So I think we would need to make an exception and say, if we were going to defer that the public testimony portion of that item is not closed.
Or we could just continue the entire public hearing.
We could do that too. That's, and act after the second public hearing, which might be not a bad idea considering that it's 7 minutes past 9. All right, that's even better.
The applicant's thought on that, and also if we continue it's just a portion of it, I don't want to have to open up the whole.
Well, if we continue the whole public hearing, then we won't start deliberation until we've closed the public hearing.
Yeah.
So we would not start deliberation tonight on these items. If we do the hybrid that I was talking about, we could start deliberation, although the question I was going to ask the board when all the testimony was complete is whether you don't want to defer deliberation, because there's a lot of complicated questions here, and it is late, and we've absorbed a lot of information. So is the general drift of the board that you might like to defer the actual deliberations until later? I'm seeing definitely a nod.
Okay, I'll go along. Some of them struck me as relatively easy and top of mind, right in front of us. But I'll go. We have been here for 3+ hours.
And it might be
Staff is
cleaner if we do
burdened by
that
that
as well.
But I guess from my perspective, sorry to interrupt, I don't want to belabor, but so from my perspective, though, the board is not considering anything to do with a parking waiver because that has been withdrawn.
That's been withdrawn.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
But what they wanted us to do was come back to the issue, I think.
But wouldn't he have to refile on
have
that
to
issue
submit
and
a
have
new
it
application.
renoticed? So then if we defer this, we still can't get to the parking at the next hearing, right?
Well,
Or could we?
we haven't passed the deadline for February yet. So they have time to get in a new application
Oh, and
for
then
the
you just
same hearing
You could
date,
consolidate them.
and we could hear them simultaneously.
And would the abutters be noticed of that?
They will, if the request changes from the way it was verbalized, then we will have to renotice the abutters.
So it might well come up, it's going to come up, there's not,
Absolutely, but it may be phrased a little bit differently. The
it
big
sounds like it's probably going
yeah,
to be clarified.
I mean, obviously, the big concern is this particular request is requesting a 44% reduction in parking. I don't think my clients are saying that they have to, construct every single parking spot that's required under the ordinance, but 44% is pretty significant. So that was where their concern lies with, is there actually enough parking on the site to support all of the uses that they're proposing?
I'm sure the board is going to be very interested in that question. And what I'm hearing is that the board is interested in deferring the deliberation portion of this. So what we will do is we'll continue the hearing without closing it, the public testimony portion.
Sure.
And then we can come back to it when we're a little bit fresher and when that item has been clarified.
Ari, I think, wants to chime in on that.
Whenever it's my turn.
Yeah, are we all set?
Yeah,
Ms. Golden?
yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Pollack, in a moment because I want to go through the other people who'd like to be heard, and then you'll have a chance. Yes, sir. Swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
And would you jot your name down?
In a moment. I'm Roy Schweiker, and I guess I want to specifically speak in opposition to the previous gentleman. I feel like the parking requirements in the city are far too small. If I should send you a picture I took over the weekend. There are 2 duplexes that are down the hill from me. Each of them has 5 parking spaces for a duplex. Each of them had a car parked on the sidewalk, one wheel on the sidewalk and one wheel on the street opposite each other. So it was only, kind of the middle of the street for 2 lanes of traffic and everyone walking because the sidewalks are blocked by these cars. And this is where you've already got 5 spaces for a duplex. People just have cars, and it's not just their own cars. Once again, this is a peculiarity of the city laws, is apparently if you own a business and you have a vehicle associated with it, you've got to get an exception to park that on your property. But if you work for some business and bring a giant truck home with you, you can park that on your property or on the street or wherever, and no permit is required. And we see a lot of that too. So I think parking, they need more and not less. And as far as costs go, I have a feeling that maybe the ordinance could be a bit, what do I want to call it, more examples. As in a warehouse store, you may have fewer people in that warehouse store than in something like a grocery store, because the aisles are bigger, heaping up these huge carts, so you have fewer people in a warehouse store than you have in a grocery store. So maybe, in fact, the parking requirements for a warehouse store should be less than in a grocery store, and maybe that's something that should go in an ordinance, but it hasn't yet. So that's the first thing I particularly wanted to talk about. And the other thing has to do with, I previously complained that the procedure of this board is oriented towards helping developers and not the residents, that the developer can come up and rebut anything that is said by a person testifying, but the person testifying cannot then go rebut what the developer said. And this bit me at the last hearing. We were talking about permeable pavement. And the developer said, oh, you can't do permeable pavement because it requires underdrain, and that's not appropriate here, or something to that effect. And I've been looking at permeable pavement, and I can't find a single instance where that's the way it's normally used.
Mr. Schweiker, we need to stick to the topic.
I'm sticking to the topic.
No, you're not. You're on another topic. So
Okay.
do you have something else to offer on the specific question of the redevelopment of the mall
Yes, I
property?
do. And if you'd give me a chance, I'd get to it. we have, one of their requests is to have more lot coverage than the ordinance allows. And I wanted to say that we should require that anything over and above the ordinance should be permeable pavement. And that's why I wanted to discuss permeable pavement, is the typical, if you go to the UNH website, they have a thing on permeable pavement, and it's designed to not send that stuff away in an underdrain. It's designed to have...
They're not asking us to rule on anything concerning permeable pavement, Mr.
I'm
Schweiker.
asking you...
It's very late. Your 5 minutes is pretty near up. Do you have anything else on that specific question of them all?
Yes, and I think you should let me finish. You gave them plenty of time. My feeling is permeable pavement is designed to keep the stuff on the site instead of sending it off by use of engineering fabric and crushed stone and whatnot. And my testimony on this is, if they want to do more than the allowable lot coverage, they should be required to use permeable pavement for anything over and above the lot coverage, because that will keep that water on that part of the lot as compared to sending it elsewhere. And the last thing I want to say in general is, most of their stuff sounds reasonable. You know, why can't they have, you know, wider lanes? Why can't they have taller light poles? My feeling, however, is the city has an ordinance that's been passed by the city council, and they're the ones that seem to think this is reasonable. And Mr. Carley, when we had the thing about Phoenix Hotel, you came up and said, you know, it's okay for us to, you know, make minor changes, you know, in neighborhoods, but something that's of great concern to the city should be made by the city council. And I think that that is the ideal statement that could be made on this, is these people really don't have a hardship. They have a huge lot. They could put a lot of different things on it. They've chosen to try and shove too much on it, and that's not a hardship. So I think you need to say there is no hardship here. We're going to deny this. If you want taller light poles and wider things, you need to talk to the city council. That's done.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard? Any comments from code enforcement?
Nothing additional right now.
Very good. Yes, sir.
May I reapproach?
Yes, you may.
I just wanted to return to this parking issue for a moment. We've somehow created a mess, and my suggestion would be that we withdraw as the applicant that particular item, and that we hope that you might entertain a resolution on the other variance requests. They all work in tandem. They're all important, and having those noticed and presented this evening, we would like to see where the board falls on those items. I do understand the concern relating to parking. It's a concern well taken, and we'll restructure that request in some way that would more align with what you typically would see.
Well, what I'm going to do is, you've heard the discussion so far amongst the board, and our reasons have for deferring deliberations have to do with things other than just the parking. So what I'm going to do is poll the board and see how they'd like to proceed. We're not obliged to act tonight. We are obliged to act within a certain period of time. We understand that.
I understand.
So that's how we're going to handle it.
No, understood.
But I appreciate your concern.
And I appreciate you listening to it.
Very good. So at this point, we can do one of two or three different things. Seems to me I say that on every case. One of those things is, without further ado, we can recess the case to some date certain and revisit. The other thing we can do is to close public testimony on the case, in which case I think we would probably want to, we could still defer our consideration until later. Or we can try to plow through all of these items absent the parking question, which has been withdrawn tonight. So what I want to do is poll the board to see how you all feel about it. I'm mindful of the fact that it is a late hour. We've been here for close to 3.5 hours. And people don't do their best thinking at the end of 3.5 hours of sitting in a chair. And these are complicated issues. That's why I'm raising the questions. So how do you feel about it, Nick?
I'm all for doing it tonight.
You want to do it tonight? Okay.
I don't know that we'll get much done tonight. It is late, and it's not just us. Our decision affects the staff as well.
Yeah. And all the people who are involved. How do you look at it?
I think there's a lot of variances. I think they're complicated, and there's a lot of material that was presented tonight that I would like to look at in more detail. So I would be in favor of closing the public hearing and deliberating at the next meeting.
Okay, Andrew?
I'd be prepared to vote tonight, but I certainly respect my colleagues who would like to push this off, so I won't stand in the way of that.
All right, I'm going to abide by the majority, and I think I'm hearing that the majority would like to defer, or is willing to defer. Is that correct?
I think you've got a 2-2 with Andrew willing to defer.
I'm fine with it,
Either way.
All right. Well, is there a motion?
I move to close the public hearing and continue deliberations to the February meeting.
Recess the public hearing, or you want to close?
I want to close the public hearing.
Close the public hearing.
But my only comment on that is, if it sounds like they're likely to come forward with another variance request on the parking, so that would be a public hearing.
That would be a new public hearing.
We can limit the scope of it to just that issue. Got it, okay.
Yeah. So that's the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
We only have 4 right now, but the deadline's until Monday.
Till Monday?
Okay.
And we could do this first.
Yes, we would.
Yes,
I
we would
I
do
expect we
this.
would address this
Yes.
first.
Yes.
Yeah. And that you'll close the phones tomorrow morning.
Well, with this new online system, you have till midnight on Monday.
Yeah, you
so-
can't close anything. Nor should you. That was a facetious remark.
It was, as was my midnight comment.
So we need to keep 285 Loudon Road and keep.
Yeah. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Aye. Opposed? We're good.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.